Okay, I'm going to get started. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see all of you guys here. Good morning to all of you guys. Sawadee Kap. Sawadee Kap to everyone online as well. Today, we're going to start with breathing mindfulness meditation. Remember, you guys have all four positions where you could do this in the seated, lying, standing, and then there's the walking position as well. So if anybody would like to practice any of those positions, you can do that. I'm going to start with the chanting, then I'm going to do the guidance. Then there's going to be a period of time where it's just quiet and we're meditating together. Then we're going to come out of that with some more chanting. So you guys are welcome to join along in that if you'd like. After the meditation, then I'm going to teach you what's called the 5 aggregates and the 6 sense spaces. This is to help you understand this human being, who you are. This is part of the path to enlightenment, is to understand how this human being works. So the Buddha is sharing with you something called the 5 aggregates and the 6 sense spaces. I'll help you to understand what these are. Then I'm going to teach you dependent origination. This is the highest, most ultimate truth of the Buddha. This is where in 12 interlinking steps, you're going to understand how beings keep coming into the world over and over and over again through the cycle of rebirth. And you'll understand the 12 interlinking steps that leads to discontentedness. Because in the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha penetrates into the heart of it with 4 simple statements. But in dependent origination, he goes through the detailed work to show you exactly what leads to this discontentedness. Because then what you would like to do is dismantle dependent origination. I'm going to teach you something called accomplishment in view. Then we're going to have our excursion where we go to Hua Tung Tao. This is a reservoir, nice park. It's a national park. It's a nature area where they have a big reservoir, and then they have bamboo bungalows around the reservoir where we can go and have some food and relax. If anybody's interested in doing zip lining or ATVs or riding bicycles or just taking a nature walk, that's all available for you over there. Then when we come back this evening, I'm going to teach you the very first fetter of personal existence view. This is where you're going to learn what it is, the symptoms of it, so that you can verify that your mind actually has this. Then I'm going to teach you how to eliminate it, and then how to know that you've actually eliminated it. So we got a nice full day ahead of us. So we're going to start with meditation. And as I mentioned, if you'd like to join in with the chanting, you're more than welcome to. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Apivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma สติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังโพโตภาควาติ Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect, just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. A nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, establishing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming in through the nose, or the sensation of the air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that it moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Photang Bhagavanang Abhivateyami Savakato Bhagavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakatoro Kavitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatawa Manusanang Poto Bhagavati. Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Once again, good morning to all of you guys. Sawadee Kap. Nice to see everyone here. Welcome to everyone online as well. We have a full day planned for today. As I mentioned, we're going to be learning the 5 aggregates and the 6 sense spaces, dependent origination, accomplishment in view. We've got an excursion, which is our last excursion, to go to this national park, Hua Tung Tao. And then this evening, you're going to be learning about the first fetter of personal existence view. So as you guys are here, feel free to make yourself comfortable. As you guys know, we have bathrooms in the back of the room. There's bathrooms outside. You can help yourself to the bathrooms at the main temple bathrooms if you like. We even have refreshments and snacks here that are provided by our students. So feel free to make yourself comfortable. As you guys may have heard me share before, the Buddhist teachings are not a bunch of beliefs of things that you're believing. They're also not rules or commandments that if everybody follows these rules or commandments, that the world will become a peaceful place. He didn't teach the way the world should be. What the Buddha is doing is he's teaching you the way the world is. And by understanding the way the world is, through these natural laws, you'll be able to make wiser and wiser decisions to navigate these natural laws. And one of the things that you need to understand the way the world is about this human being who you are. Understanding more about this being who you are is going to help you understand what you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So he has these teachings of the 5 aggregates and the 6 sense spaces, which are going to help you to understand this being who you are. That way you'll be able to understand how your mind's functioning. You'll understand what's happening in terms of what you're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And this is going to help you to be able to accomplish the enlightened mental state. Without understanding the 5 aggregates and the 6 sense bases, you wouldn't even be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, let alone enlightenment itself. Remember that first stage of enlightenment, at that point you will have gathered up all the teachings you need to be able to make your way to enlightenment. It's kind of like being at base camp at Mount Everest. And these are 2 of the teachings, among others, that I'm going to be sharing today and throughout the rest of the retreat, that you're going to need to get to that first stage of enlightenment. There's still more learning and more growth that you need once you get to the first stage of enlightenment, but you've gathered up everything you've needed in order to be able to continue to make your way to enlightenment itself. So as we go, just like always, you guys are welcome to ask any and all questions that you like. We have the microphones here in the white bowl for those of you guys at the temple. You can just press the gray button, the lights will come on. You can hold that up to your chin, and then we'll be able to hear you here at the temple. We'll be able to hear you online as well. If you speak here without a microphone, they won't be able to hear you online. And then for those of you guys online, you can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So let's just dive right in and start to understand what the 5 aggregates are. Sometimes people refer to these as the 5 collections or 5 elements. You might think of these like 5 criteria of what determine what is a living being and what isn't a living being. And I'm going to explain to you here in a moment of why this is so important and the benefits of learning this. But let me just jump right in and teach it to you. This is what's going to determine what is a living being. And remember, none of the teachings of the Buddha are to be believed. So as I teach this to you, you can independently reflect on this and verify that it's true, because you know that you're a living being. So you can see that you're going to have all 5 of these aggregates or these collections or these criteria. You're going to have all 5 of these. So the first one is that a living being is going to have a physical body. They're going to be physical structures. You can verify that, yes, you have physical structures. That's the physical form. A living being is going to have feelings, which these are the results of experiences in the mind that you experience through the 6 sense bases. This is the discontentedness, the pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. Those are conditioned feelings. A living being is going to have conditioned feelings. Then there's going to be certain perceptions. These are beliefs or opinions based on how things seems to be. They're not necessarily true. Oftentimes they're assumptions. So there's certain perceptions that a living being is going to have. When they look out at the world, they're going to see things in a certain way, and they may or may not be that way. They're assumptions. There's volitional formations, which are choices and decisions that are made. These are intentional decisions that being's able to make. This is essentially free will, that a being's going to be able to make their own free will decisions. Then there's a consciousness or the mind. You might think of this like a container that contains certain things. Okay, so now I'll go through and kind of describe some of these in a little bit more detail. I think physical form, you guys understand very well. The structures of the body, you kind of understand that. The feelings, we've talked about that before. Through the universal truth of discontentedness, you've understood pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. This is how the mind's forming its inner feelings based on some condition. That the mind's going to have what's called craving, desire, attachment, this longing, yearning, and now the mind's going to form a feeling based on whether it gets that thing or not. So if the mind craves and longs and yearns for it to be sunny outside, when you see that it's sunny, you'll get so excited and so happy. But then when it's raining or some other weather event, you'll be sad or frustrated or agitated or annoyed because the mind's forming its inner feelings based on some condition. So if the bank account is up here, an individual might get really happy and excited, but then when it goes down here, the mind gets sad or frustrated. These are the feelings that a living being is going to have. And I just use some examples from the human realm that you would understand, but we can understand this through the animal realm too. If an animal wants food and they're really hungry and they get that food, they can be so happy and excited. And then when they're not eating, they could be angry or frustrated or irritated. This isn't a biological response. This is actually from the mind. Or say a certain pet, let's say like a dog has a certain owner that they have an attachment to. When they see that owner, they can get really excited and happy and, wow, my owner is home, right? And then when that person goes away, maybe on a long business trip, maybe 6 months away, this animal can feel sadness or could be lonely or missing this individual. These are feelings that a living being is going to experience, either pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. These are conditioned feelings. Then what perceptions are, these are beliefs or opinions about the way things seem to be. These are assumptions, right? What this could be is, let's just say someone's like a police officer, and let's just say that they're dispatched to a particular convenience store, that a call comes over the radio that says, hey, there's someone at this convenience store that's it's getting robbed. There's someone there that's robbing this store. And now the police officer, hurries off to the convenience store. And if they rushed into the convenience store and they saw someone in a black hoodie standing over somebody on the floor, and this person on the floor is bleeding from a gunshot wound, and the person with the black hoodie is holding the gun and pointing it at the person on the floor, a perception might be that the person in the black hoodie holding the gun is the robber. But that may or may not actually be true, because that could be the cashier. The cashier could have stolen the gun or gotten the gun away from the robber, and now the cashier actually is the one who shot the robber, and now the robber is on the floor bleeding out. So if the police officer just rushed right in and started shooting the person with the gun, they're now making a decision through their perception that may or may not be a wise decision. Then there's the volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. These are intentional decisions that you're making based on intention. So if you were just walking down the street, for example, and a cockroach ran under your foot and you smashed it and crushed it, that's not an intentional decision. That wasn't a volitional formation. Your volitional formation in that situation was to walk down the street. And that was the choice that you were making. That was your intentional decision. But the fact that this cockroach ran under your foot and got smashed and killed, that wasn't your volitional formation. That wasn't an intentional decision. That is something that occurred, but it wasn't your intention. Then there's the consciousness or the mind. This is that container that actually contains the feelings, the perceptions, and the volitional formations. Without a consciousness or without the mind, you wouldn't have feelings, perceptions, and volitional formations. So one of the reasons why the Buddha is teaching you this is because the human mind will tend to cling to these and hold on to them and crave for them to be permanent. So for example, the physical form, the mind might cling to this physical body, wanting it to be permanent. So now when you look in the mirror and you see a wrinkle, your mind can be discontent because of that. You can be frustrated or irritated or feel like less of a person. Or if you see a pimple or a mole, you might not feel comfortable to go outside. You might feel embarrassed for other people to see that pimple or mole. Or if you get a little bit of extra fat or some gray hair, or you're losing your hair, you might feel uncomfortable because the mind's clinging to this body, wanting it to appear to others in a certain way. Or say you feel a little bit of hunger, pain in the stomach. The mind, if it's craving permanent comfort of this physical body, now the individual experiences grumpiness. It's not a biological response that you're hungry and now the mind experiences grumpiness. It's the mind craving and clinging to this body, wanting it to be permanently comfortable. When you live in an impermanent world, everything around you is impermanent. You're not going to experience permanent comfort of the physical body, but the mind with these 5 aggregates is going to tend to cling to these in the unenlightened state, wanting this body, in this example, to be permanent, either the appearance of it or the comfort of it, and things like this. So ultimately what you need to be able to do in order to get to enlightenment, among other things, is to eliminate your clinging to this physical form, where you're craving for it to be permanent. But you're also not interested in being on the other side, where you could care less about this body and you don't care for it and you don't take care of it, right? So it's a matter of coming to the middle, realizing that there is a physical body and you do need to make wise decisions about it, but you don't cling to it and become upset or frustrated or agitated when you're not experiencing a certain thing, but you're also not over here and not caring for it either. So these would be the 2 opposite extremes, where you would like to be in the middle and make wise decisions related to this physical body. And if that means having certain food intake or exercise or, skincare or whatever it is that you decide that you would like to do, maybe combing your hair or cutting your hair, cutting your nails, you're going to need to take care of this physical body, but you're not interested in being obsessed about it and clinging to it and wanting it to be permanent. But you're also not interested in being over here where you never care for it either. You would like to be in the middle. So this is the physical form, and if the mind's clinging to it, craving permanence, then it will experience discontentedness. You're going to need to learn how to not cling to it, but come to the middle and make wise decisions about it. Same thing with the feelings. The mind can cling to these feelings that now when the mind experiences a pleasant feeling like happiness or excitement, you can cling to it and now want that to be permanent. So if you've ever been out with friends before, maybe you're at a social event, you guys are hanging out at a restaurant, maybe 5, 6, 10 of your friends, and you guys are laughing and joking and having a good old time, right? And now it's just so jovial, so much fun. And then when it's over, you feel sad, like, oh, we have to finish this. This is over. We can't continue this, right? So while you're having that pleasant experience, you got to remind yourself that these feelings that you're experiencing, they're not permanent. You need to learn how to not cling to those feelings so that you can ultimately get to the unconditioned happiness. As long as you cling and you hold on to the conditional happiness or the conditional pleasant feelings, you're never going to be able to get to the permanent happiness, the unconditioned happiness. So sometimes someone might say, like, I am happy or I am sad, but that's not actually true. It's just that the mind is experiencing these feelings based on the craving and clinging of the mind. As long as the mind is craving and clinging, it will experience these feelings, and now the mind's going to cling to those and want them to be permanent, either the pleasant feelings, or if you're experiencing something like sadness or frustration, the mind might think that somehow this is permanent, and you go through this long period of sadness, maybe multiple months, even years. People can experience really debilitating sadness, and this is because the mind is clinging to certain things, and you need to be able to see that these feelings aren't you. That's not who you are. It's what the mind is experiencing, but it's not you as a person. Then we have these perceptions that it's important not to cling to these, because that example I gave you with the police officer, if the police officer clung to a perception and just ran into the convenience store and started shooting that person with the black hoodie and the gun, they probably just ruined their life. They're going to be in jail probably for the rest of their life. And that's why the way they train police officers is that when they sling open the door and they see that person standing there with a gun, they say, put down the gun, police, put down the gun. Because if that is the person who's the cashier, they're going to turn and see the police officer, and right away they're going to put down their gun because it's like, oh, thank goodness there's somebody here to help me. But if that's the person who's doing the robbing, when they turn and see the police officer, they're going to point their gun at the police officer, and now the police officer is going to shoot that person because now they've investigated. They didn't cling to their perception. They're getting information. They're getting insight to determine, what should I do here? What I see is there is a person holding a gun, pointing it at someone else, and there's a person bleeding out on the floor. That's all we know to be true. We don't know who's who in the situation. So the police are taught to not cling to their perceptions and to actually come in and announce themselves and make sure that they're investigating to determine who's the person with the gun. Who is that person? Is that the cashier or is that the robber? Because you need to know before you decide what you're going to do next. So you're not interested in clinging to your perceptions. I'll give you another example that maybe is a little bit more relatable to you. Let's just say you have a child and you've asked your child to clean their bedroom, and now you've walked away and you're away for an hour or two and your child is in their room and you're assuming in your mind that they're cleaning their room. That's something that you're thinking because you know that they typically do that when you walk away. Now you go away for an hour or two and you come back and you go into their room and their room is a complete wreck, like something's all over the floor and they're sitting in the middle of their floor with all this stuff all over the floor. Well, if you were clinging to your perception, you might assume that they didn't actually clean their room, because when you walk in, you just see them sitting in the middle of the room with stuff strewn all over the floor. But you weren't there, so you don't know that that's the case. If you were to just start yelling and hollering and screaming at your child, first, that's wrong intention, wrong speech. It would be unwise to do that. But nonetheless, you'll be clinging to your perception here, which could be motivating unskillful conduct. What you would like to do is say, what happened? Right? Because maybe 30 seconds before you walked in, they bumped into their bookshelf and their bookshelf fell with all the books all over the floor. They might have actually been cleaning their room for an entire hour or two, but right before you walked in, they might have bumped into a bookshelf and now their books flew all over the floor. And you don't know that because you weren't there. Whereas if you were to just walk in and just assume that they hadn't cleaned their room, now you're going to be starting to make decisions based on that assumption. And that could lead to unwholesome results. It could lead to unskillful conduct. So you're never interested in assuming anything. When you walk into the room, it would be like, hey daughter, hey son, what's happening? I thought you were going to be cleaning your room. And they're like, oh, I did clean my room, mommy or daddy. I just bumped into the bookshelf and the books flew all over the floor. I got to clean this up now. Oh, okay, sounds good, right? Done. Conversation's over, right? But if you just assume that that they didn't clean the room, now you could be making unwise decisions that's damaging your relationship. So you're never interested in assuming anything about anything, because if you cling to your perceptions, that's going to lead to making potentially unwise decisions that are leading to now unwholesome results. Because remember, with the natural law of karma yesterday, what you're looking to get to is wise decision making. You're looking to get to the point where you're only producing wholesome karma or wholesome results in your life. And in order to do that, you need to make decisions based on the truth. You can't make decisions based on a perception. If you make decisions based on a perception, that may or may not actually be true, and now you're making an unwise decision. So you're not interested in making any decisions until you actually know the truth. And that's going to, in some cases, mean that you're going to need to ask questions and ask what's going on here in order to figure out what are the best decisions that you could make in any given situation. Then volitional formations, sometimes the mind can cling to these. These are choices and decisions. Say that you were interested in going to Australia and you had this plan 6 months in advance, and you'd booked your airplane tickets, you booked your hotel, you booked all these things, and now you're so excited to go to Australia. You can't wait to go to Australia. It's going to be so fun and so exciting. And now the time comes that you show up to the airport, and now they tell you that your plane has been canceled. Maybe it's COVID, right? Maybe it's COVID time and your plane's canceled and there's no planes going to Australia. Well, if you cling to your decision and you're holding on to that and you're really wanting that thing to be permanent, now you're going to be frustrated or agitated or annoyed because the mind's clinging to this decision, wanting it to be permanent. So you need to be able to not cling to your decision, where you make decisions and you're leading towards a certain goal or objective, but you understand that impermanence can come affect these decisions at any time. I'll give you an example from my life. In 2002, I went to the USA because I was invited there to teach a retreat. And I taught a retreat and it went really well. And then the students said, hey, we would like you to come back next year, 2023, and teach another retreat. And I said, sure, I'll do it. You guys plan it, make it happen. I'll be there. So this was like 10 and a half months before the actual retreat. And then they were planning, they were advertising, they were collecting up support to be able to pay for me to get an airplane and stuff like this and pay for food and things like this. And we got about 2.5 months out from the retreat, and they looked at what they were able to do, and everything had changed. There was 2 different locations that we were supposed to do the retreat. One was in Atlanta, Georgia. One was in Massachusetts. And things had drastically changed. And they asked me, what should we do here? The person who was hosting the retreat in Atlanta, Georgia had gotten pregnant previously because there was that 10.5 month gap. They had gotten pregnant and their baby was due like 4 weeks before the retreat. The person up in Massachusetts, they had gotten injured on their job and they weren't even working anymore. They were having difficulties even to be able to take care of their basic necessities, and they weren't able to take care of the things they needed to take care of at the retreat up in Massachusetts. And they said, what should we do here? I said, I think you guys should postpone this for another time, right? No need to cling to this decision. Of course, people were looking forward to having this retreat in 2023, but if they clung to that decision and held on to it and wanted it to be permanent, now they're going to be frustrated and irritated. And what I suggested to them to do is just let go. And any money that they collected, I suggested they just return it back to the people who had donated the money. And those people, most of them decided to give it away to temples and stuff like that because they had already donated it for the purpose of helping the teachings of the Buddha reach to the USA. So rather than take it back, they just donated it to different temples and stuff like that. But nonetheless, they didn't cling to this decision. They were able to let it go. even though it was a decision that they made 10 and a half months prior to have these retreats. As they got closer, there was a bunch of impermanence that happened. And because of that, you need to update your decision making. Whereas if you cling to this decision, it's going to cause difficulties for the mind that you're going to experience the painful feelings. So if you understand whenever you're making a decision that this may or may not happen. In fact, that's what I shared with them 10 and a half months in advance when they were getting really excited about me coming. I said, hey, look, until I'm actually teaching the retreat, it hasn't happened yet. I said, there can be any number of impermanence that happens along the way, including when I'm stepping off the plane in Atlanta, Georgia. I could twist my ankle getting off the sky bridge and I could end up in the hospital. You don't know. Maybe I'll break my leg or something. So you're not ever interested in clinging to a decision, but you do need to plan and look forward to certain things that you're doing. You need to make these plans, but fully realizing that impermanence can come affect these plans at any point. And if you cling to these decisions, it's going to cause difficulties for the mind because you're now going to experience the painful feelings as a result of clinging to your decisions. So you need to be willing to update your decisions as things are changing in your day-to-day life and not cling to any particular thing that you may or may not be doing. The consciousness, what the mind's doing here is it's clinging to its identity inside the mind. The mind can cling to a certain identity like I am kind, or I am friendly, or I am American, or I am a business owner, or I am anything, any of this I am about your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your nationality, your job or occupation. The mind can see this as its own identity, and it'll think this is who it is. And now if you cling to that identity in your mind, when that starts changing, you'll be really shaken up. So if you've ever been in a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend and you identified with I am a boyfriend or I am a girlfriend, well, now when you guys broke up, you might have felt like you wanted to hurry up and get right back into another relationship because the mind was uncomfortable with being single because it identified with I am a boyfriend or I'm a girlfriend or I'm a husband or I'm a wife. And now when you were single, the mind didn't identify that way. So it wanted to hurry up and get right back into another relationship. Or say you were in a certain occupation, maybe like I am a police officer. And now when you retire, or maybe you get injured or you get fired, and maybe you're a food server, or maybe you're a taxi driver, the mind is identifying with I am a police officer. And now because the mind is identifying that way, but it's not doing that, it can feel very uncomfortable and it can struggle during this period of time. So impermanence is going to come visit you on these kinds of things. And as soon as you try to cling to something as this is who I am as a person, when all that changes, you'll feel like less of a person. You'll feel diminished or degraded. So by not clinging to this self-identity in the mind, you can understand that I'm performing the role of teaching the Buddhist teachings, or I'm performing the role of being a police officer, or this body was born in a place that's called the USA, but the mind doesn't have to adopt the identity of I am American or I am a police officer. It's a matter of understanding that you're performing these roles, or you might have experienced these things, but you don't have to adopt it as your identity. I'll give you another example of this in relationship to volitional formations that sometimes we're taught, like if we've used drugs or alcohol in the past, we're taught to think that I am an addict or I am an alcoholic, right? In the mind, based on its choices and decisions that we've made, we might adopt this identity of I am an alcoholic or I am an addict. And we can understand that while we might have chosen to do those things at a certain time, it doesn't define who we are today. That those are just choices and decisions that we made. We don't have to cling to that as part of our identity. So these volitional formations that we make, sometimes the mind can adopt that even as your identity inside the mind. Do you guys have any questions on what these 5 aggregates are and how it's important to not cling to them in all these different ways? No questions? You have a question? Yeah, go for it. Don't be shy. No need to be shy.
So this question, good morning, relates to, and I don't know, I know we talked about it a little bit previously, but I'm still a little, I can't myself see how some of these would be present at, let's say, an insect. And then if you take a mosquito, for example, you know, how does the mosquito represent his beliefs and opinions? How is he able to make choices when he sits on my arm to sting me? He's hungry for blood. He's driven by his instincts. How is he able to make a decision that, oh, this time I don't feel like taking it from this person, I'm gonna go to another person? In addition, I'm having a hard time seeing how the lower level animals are superior to, let's say, a tree or a series of trees. There's been quite a lot of studies recently, I think in recent years, about high intelligence of plants. And let's say if you take a forest, it's been shown how the whole entire forest is connected through the roots, through the fungi. And then let's say if there is a fire in one side of the forest, the trees are intelligent enough to communicate with the rest of the forest and, let's say, send the water to this particular area and kind of prevent the fire or whatnot, you know? So there's a high intelligence and communication also between the animal plant kingdom. And I know you said before that trees cannot get up and move and walk, but that's because they don't have the capability, right? It's like as if you asked a tiger to go flying. Well, the tiger won't fly because it doesn't have wings. Now, the tree cannot move from place A to B because it doesn't have legs and a capability, but maybe if it did, then who knows? Maybe it would avoid the fire by getting up and going somewhere and moving, right? So,
okay, let's take one at a time. Okay, so I'll use a similar insect. Let's use a bee because I think it's easier for you guys to see these. Instead of a mosquito, I'm going to use a bee, right? So does a bee have physical form? It does, right? Can you see that it has feelings? So a bee, right, if it's flying around and we swat at it, it's going to get angry, right? And now it's going to start to try to attack you, right? So the bee's perception is that this person is trying to hurt me. And now that's its perception, that this thing is bad. And now its choice and decision is, I'm going to now go sting this particular thing because it's meaning harm to me. So I'm going to now cause harm to it, right? And where this is all coming from is its mind, the consciousness. So you can see how an insect has all 5 aggregates. Animals and humans have all 5 aggregates. They're living beings. Where you can see something like a plant or a fungus or something like this, they don't have all 5 aggregates. So let's go into that one now. Do you understand the first one? Okay. So the second one is, it's not that plants or animals are superior, right? That's not a word that I ever have used because that's like a pecking order. There's no pecking order. That's like a something that an animal would have in the animal realm. There is a pecking order and they need that in order to survive. Because if you didn't have if you didn't know who the matriarch of your herd was as an elephant, you wouldn't be able to survive because she's showing us the watering holes, the migration paths, where to eat. If we didn't know who the matriarch of our elephant herd was, we wouldn't have survived as elephants. But as human beings, we don't need a pecking order. We can view everybody as being equal. And that's part of getting to enlightenment, is getting rid of any kind of conceit or thoughts that there is any kind of superiority or pecking order. So a plant, it's just being able to recognize that it doesn't have all 5 of these aggregates. And while you brought up some examples of things that are happening among plants, these aren't coming from a consciousness. These aren't intentional choices. This is biological responses that are happening. So, for example, if example I think you guys used earlier, maybe it was in a private conversation, how there's a sunflower that might turn towards the sun. This is a biological response that if the sun is shining, the sunflower is going to turn towards the sun. But that sunflower can't say, well, I'm not interested in being facing the sun, I'm going to now look away from the sun. The sunflower isn't doing that. It's a biological response that the cells and atoms and molecules and these things, it's choosing to do that, not as a choice from a consciousness, but it's happening because of the biological response of the individual structures of this plant is designed to turn towards the sun. So it has physical form, but it doesn't have feelings. That's why if you knock into a plant, it's not going to hit you back like the bee, right? The perceptions, it doesn't look out at the world and have certain views and opinions about the world. It doesn't look at the world and be like, the air quality isn't so good here. I think I'm going to move to another place because the air quality here isn't so good. I'm going to pick myself up and move somewhere else because I don't like the air quality in this particular area. It can't do that. And it doesn't have volitional formations that are coming from a consciousness. So this is not about superiority. It's just about seeing the 5 aggregates and how there are living beings that have them, and then there's non-living beings, and they don't have all 5 aggregates. And you can see that a plant is not a living being, not only from the 5 aggregates, but you can see it through the natural law of karma, that whenever you're causing harm to a living being, harm is going to come back to you. So that bee example, if you try to swat the bee, there's a good chance that this bee is going to try to sting you. And that's the harm that's coming back to you because now you're putting out harm. So now this living being is going to try to harm you. If you went up to a tree and you slapped it, it's not going to slap you back, because you're not causing harm to a living being. Because if you cause harm to a living being, a unenlightened being is going to typically try to cause harm back to you. So you can see that when we harvest a tree or we harvest a broccoli, there's no harm that's coming to us. We're actually experiencing wholesome results. If we're actually causing harm to a living being, then we're going to experience harm coming back to us. You can see this also with like a bacteria or a virus. Oftentimes people talk about these as if they're alive. But if we eliminate a bacteria from the body, if that was a living being, we would experience unwholesome results. But we don't. When we eliminate a bacteria from the body, we're going to experience wholesome results, which is the body's going to become more healthy.
Okay. Could you, let's say, there has been experiments where people put 2 plants next to each other, and they've been saying positive, happy emotions to one and negative, harmful emotions to the other, physically just talking to the plant. And it's been shown over time that the one that was receiving positive emotions have been thriving versus the one that's been receiving negative, harmful emotions has been struggling. How could that be explained, let's say, if the plant doesn't have feelings?
Yeah, they're not receiving harmful emotions. They're not receiving pleasant emotions because you can't get emotions from somebody else. If there are emotions, which I would say there's not in a plant, but if there are emotions, it's coming from inside that being. Like I can't cause you to be angry. It's not possible that if you're going to experience anger, your mind is producing that. Like there's nothing you can do to make me angry or frustrated or annoyed. It's just impossible for you to do that at this point in my life. So it's not that something else is giving you emotions. If there's emotions being experienced, it's coming from that being. I've participated in these before. When I was growing up in grade 5, we did that where we grew plants and half of the class said positive things to the plant and other class said negative things. And we saw the difference in growth. I can't explain that because I'm not a scientist, but I'm sure that scientists could explain that, but it's not because of any of these 5 aggregates that that's occurring. A plant doesn't have all 5 aggregates. It doesn't have a consciousness to be able to have craving, desire, attachment, and now choose not to grow because it hears these negative thoughts or these negative things that are being directed towards it. But I can't explain why that is because I'm not a botanist or a scientist, but I do understand how to identify a living being. And this is how you identify a living being. And one of the things that the mind can do is if you have the perception that a plant is a living being, when you hear something like this, an individual could cling to that perception and not be able to see and identify each of these things. So what I would encourage you to do to be able to see what I'm sharing is to make sure you understand each one of these aggregates very closely. Be sure you don't cling to your own perception of what you think is the case, and then logically work through this with plants and look to see if you can identify every one of these, because I would say that a plant doesn't have all 5 of these aggregates. It definitely has form, but I don't see any feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, or a consciousness in a plant. You can see that through the 5 aggregates and through the natural law of karma, because if I walked up to a plant and I slap it, it's not going to slap me back. But if I did that to a human being, they're probably going to slap me back, or some unwholesome things definitely going to happen to me. Same thing like a dog or a cat. If you were aggressive like that with a living being, you're going to experience unwholesome results coming back to you. But with a plant, because it's a non-living being, you're not going to experience that. But we do use language a lot of times where we think that plants are alive, right? That's what we say. We say, don't kill that plant. Well, you're not actually killing the plant. You're harvesting the plant. Or you might say, I'm going to kill this bacteria in the body. You're not actually killing the bacteria. You're eliminating it from the body. So when we have a lack of wisdom of the 5 aggregates, we'll tend to say things that are not necessarily representing the truth, because the mind will cling to a perception. And now when we speak, we will speak in ways that isn't actually representing true reality. So the more you understand these kinds of things, which are the natural laws, you might notice that your language changes. Like I could never say, don't kill that plant, because I know it's not a living being. And I would never be able to say to my son, like, don't kill that bacteria in your body. I would say, oh, we need to eliminate this bacteria in your body. Here's this medicine that's going to help you to do that. So you might notice your language starts to change as you start to come to understand these more closely. Any other questions on the 5 aggregates? Yeah, sure.
I was just wondering how things like meta-awareness and, even they say, like, most animals can't recognize themselves in a mirror. And also, why thinking is not included in here.
So thinking is not something that is in here, because these 5 aggregates are describing what a living being is, and thinking is being done inside the consciousness, inside the mind. So I have a diagram here in a moment. I'm going to show you how form is the physical body, but the other 3, feelings, perceptions, and volitional formations, are inside the consciousness. So it's included in the consciousness. How the Buddha discovered this is his thinking, right? So I can't tell you why the Buddha didn't put thinking in here, but it's inside the consciousness. And if a being has a consciousness, they can think.
And would that include things like meta-awareness?
Meta meaning loving kindness? Or what do you mean by meta? Because that's a Pali word also.
Oh, not capital M. I guess like awareness of one's activities and thoughts independent from those activities and thoughts.
That's the consciousness. The consciousness is going to be able to be aware of all of those things.
And it's one of those things where how the Buddha knew that animals could do that. We don't really know. How
animals are aware of themselves, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you spend time with beings, you can observe them and you can see their capabilities and what they have. So you can see that a dog has awareness of its own body and of what's going on in its surroundings. You can see these kinds of things through observation.
My dog can't recognize himself in a mirror. He thinks it's another dog.
Well, that's where they have a lack of intelligence, right? They don't have the same level of mind as a human being. That's different than whether or not they meet these criteria. How developed the consciousness is going to be different from being to being to being. But the fact that these criteria determine what is a living being, that's what the Buddha is just sharing with you. These are the 5 criteria that determine what is a living being. But how developed one's consciousness is a whole different question.
I understand. Thank you.
Yeah.
Regarding that, is not a question. I would say that the perception or your dog is not correct. Right.
Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. Oh, you don't have a question? Okay. Be sure you guys ask questions. If you guys start teaching each other, it's going to get very messy.
So, what about a person in a vegetative state or coma? I don't think they have perceptions, feelings, or volitional formations. I'm not sure about consciousness, but would they still be considered a living being?
Yeah, in that case, there's been situations where like someone is technically considered to be brain dead, medically brain dead, but the consciousness is still intact with the body. The Buddha describes death as the breakup of the body and the mind. He says that's when death occurs, essentially, is the separation of the body and the mind. So there's been situations where like a individual is technically brain dead, they're on life support, their family comes into the room with the doctor, they're contemplating whether or not to pull the plug of the machine, and ultimately they decide not to do that. And then 3 weeks later or a month later or however long later, the individual wakes up and they say, thank you so much for not pulling the plug. I heard the entire conversation. I was completely aware of all of it. I just couldn't speak. So technically the doctor had determined that they were brain dead, but yet the mind was still functioning. And this is one of the ways that you know that the brain and the mind are two different things, because you can be technically brain dead and the mind can still be intact. So in this situation, an individual is still a living being. It's just that they're not functioning the way that a conscious, awake, someone who's physically awake, that particular being, but they still have all 5 of these aggregates because the mind is still intact. It's still there. It's just not functioning in the same way as a being who's physically awake.
So would they still have volitional formations because they wouldn't be able to make decisions?
They're able to make decisions, but they can't move their physical body in that situation. They're still making decisions in their mind. Like this one study that I saw, this individual in their mind was like, no, don't pull the plug. Don't pull the plug. I'm still here. I'm still here. But they couldn't verbalize it. So they couldn't move their body, but they could make decisions. They had thoughts. These kinds of things were still occurring inside the mind.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's more about the plants. There's some people that just want to think that the plants are alive and they're living beings.
That actually brought me, I have a follow-up questions from that. So should the physical life be saved at all cost? Let's say this technology exists to keep somebody alive for years, but it's let's say it's millions and millions and millions of dollars, which could maybe used towards I don't know, hundreds of children in the orphanage or something like that, or some other people who maybe lack resources but they're also ill or diseased. So I'm just thinking, what's the thinking between like how do you manage resources? Is the life should it be saved at all costs?
This is a case-by-case decision for each individual family and each individual, group of people. You can't really come up with a blanket decision on that kind of thing. The Buddha never teaches to preserve all life at all costs. That would be unwise. That's like a permanent decision where there's too many variables involved. But let's just say somebody got into a car accident, they were in this comatose state, and their family lacked resources, and they weren't even able to provide medical equipment whatsoever to keep them alive for any amount of time. That's the nature of the gamma of this being, the cause and effect sequence of decisions, where maybe somebody else who has more ability to keep their family member alive would make different decisions, and that's going to be on a case-by-case basis. And that's the gamma, the results of decisions, the sequence of events that is occurring. Okay, so now let's talk about the reason why to learn about these 5 aggregates. It's going to help you to identify a living being so that you can practice the first precept. If you remember the first precept, it talks about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. You wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't know how to identify a living being. So that's why it's important to understand what the 5 aggregates are so that you can then practice the 5 aggregate. It also helps you practice the first precept. It also helps you to eliminate unwholesome karma so that you can fully eliminate any kind of anger, hatred, and ill will towards all living beings and cultivate loving kindness towards all living beings, right? If you had hatred towards a ostrich or towards a clam or towards something like this, you're going to now not be able to get to enlightenment because you have that anger, hatred, and ill will in there. So you're going to need to extinguish any unwholesome karma by not causing any harm to living beings, and any anger, hatred, ill will that you have in your mind towards a living being, you're going to need to be able to extinguish it and eliminate it. So that's why you need to know the 5 aggregates to be able to purify the mind of this ill will. It also helps you to practice non-clinging to these aggregates because you have all 5 aggregates. And we talk about craving and clinging, and we typically talk about them as external things. And you understand, like, it's unwise to cling to your money or crave money. It's unwise to chase after that and form your inner feelings on that. It's unwise to chase after a brand new car and somehow cling to this and think that this should be permanent. So these 5 aggregates aren't necessarily always as obvious to you that these exist and that you can easily cling to them. You could cling to the physical form. Okay, that kind of makes sense for people. But now when you think about your feelings, your perceptions, your volitional formations, and the consciousness, it's not so easy to identify those things without having understood the 5 aggregates and realize that your mind can cling to them. So if your mind was clinging to any of the 5 aggregates, you wouldn't be able to experience enlightenment because you're going to experience discontentedness related to this. And you wouldn't be able to make wise decisions, like I shared about, like with the clinging to the perceptions. If an individual clinged to their perceptions, they wouldn't be able to make wise decisions and get to the truth to be able to then extinguish all their unwholesome karma by producing only wholesome karma. So it's going to actually help you to eliminate the pollutions of desire for form and desire for formless. These two taints, what desire for form is where the mind clings to this being, wanting it to be permanent. Sometimes people are taught that there's such thing as eternal life or permanent life, and now somebody might be clinging to that and wanting eternal life. And if you cling to that, thinking that life is eternal, now the mind's craving permanence in a world that is impermanent. You wouldn't be able to experience the peace and joy of the enlightened mental state. And this is the reason why when people get towards death, they might have a very painful experience because they're clinging to this life, wanting it to be permanent, but yet now they're on their deathbed about to die. It can be a very painful death. But if you get comfortable with this life not being permanent, and it is impermanent, and that this physical form is not permanent, now as you're getting closer and closer to death, you're not holding on to existence and wanting it to be permanent. Desire for formless, what this is these 5 realms that the Buddha taught, which is the truth, and you can verify. There's the hell realm, the animal realm, the afflicted spirit realm, the human realm, and the heavenly realm. The form realms are the animal realm and the human realm. The formless realms are hell, afflicted spirits, and the heavenly realm. And while we call them realms, and people tend to think of them as being really far away, all these beings are here in the same time and space as us. So just like there's a human being sitting in this chair, if a human being got up and left, there could be an animal that came and sat here, like a dog or a cat or something like that. So while we call them realms, it's really just referring to the classification of beings, that these are the beings that are existing, and we can kind of categorize them in this particular way, and we can describe them in this particular way. So a formless being is a being that's in hell, the afflicted spirits, which are like ghosts, and then there's heavenly beings. We're most familiar with form beings because of animals and humans, but if every single being was a form being, that would be permanence. So there is impermanence, that not all beings having physical form. There's some beings that don't have form. And in some cases, an individual could not only crave or desire to be in the physical realm, but they could desire to be in one of these other realms. There's some people that have a longing, yearning to be in the heavenly realm, or longing, yearning to even be in hell. There's some people in the world that would really like to go to hell. There's some people who would like to be a ghost, right? So if the mind is craving and clinging to existence, clinging to these 5 aggregates, the mind is still holding on to this world and desiring to exist in the cycle of rebirth. You need to get to the point where you're not clinging and holding on to continued existence in the world over and over and over again. So these are some of the reasons why it's helpful to understand the 5 aggregates. I've got this diagram here just to kind of give you a pictorial representation of this so you can kind of imagine it, where there's the physical body, which is the physical form, and then there's the mind, and then inside the mind you've got the feelings, the perceptions, the volitional formations, and then the consciousness itself is the mind. And then these two things are coming together to be able to create the human being. So the combination of the body and the mind is what forms the human being. And we refer to that as a person or as a human being. So this diagram can kind of help you to understand where these things are, so that you can identify them and know not to cling to them. Because as I mentioned, they're not always so apparent that this feelings, these perceptions, these volitional formations, this consciousness, you might not be so apparent that you need to eliminate your clinging to this. It's pretty clear to eliminate clinging to money and wanting that to be permanent, or a relationship or things like that. But these things aren't necessarily always so straightforward to be able to see unless you've actually studied the 5 aggregates. Okay, so these are the 5 aggregates. Any questions on these? Yes.
Beings, all beings. Is the number constant of all beings? Of course, number of each in class, each number of each units in the class is different, of course, to impermanence. But is cumulative number constant?
If it was, that would be permanence. But there's going to be beings that are regularly getting to enlightenment. So if we started out with just say 100 beings, as some of those beings get to enlightenment, they're now going to escape the cycle of rebirth, and we don't have the same number anymore. So that's going to be constantly changing as well.
So they're coming in and getting out.
I don't know about the creation of new beings. I don't think that's what's occurring. I think from the beginning of time, we had a certain number of beings, and now those beings are declining, but I don't really have a lot of insight into that part of it. But I know that the number of beings is changing, going down and down and down. Scientists tell us that, and we can see it ourselves.
Of all beings, so in heavenly inspected, afflicted spirits, heavenly animal, and human realm, all of them together, the number is going down.
Yes. What we see in the human realm is we see an expansion in the human realm, but that's because we're seeing a shrinking of the animal realm. As the animal realm has been shrinking over the years, we're seeing an expansion of the human realm. And then these formless realms, those are either expanding or shrinking as well.
And Buddha never touched on that topic. So how the beings are created, or how they live out of those five realms. They're living by being enlightened. Yes.
Yeah. But I've never seen anything from the Buddha where he talks about the creation of beings, but he does talk about how beings move throughout these realms and how they're reborn into the different realms. He does talk about that.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Gary?
In Christianity or some religions and sects, there's belief in like spiritual possession, and there's exorcists and all that. Does that exist in Buddhism, and like where does it stand with that?
I've never seen anywhere where the Buddha talks about that in his teachings. I've seen plenty of things, TV shows and things like this where people have talked about that kind of thing. I've never witnessed it for myself 100%. I've seen people that I would say appear to potentially have that going on, but I haven't been able to confirm it with 100% certainty myself, and I haven't seen it in the Buddhist teachings either. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you the 6 sense bases. This is the next piece of understanding human beings that you need to know, and then I'm going to explain to you why you need to understand it. So this is where the mind is longing, yearning through the 6 sense bases. It's essentially like these 6 sense bases are windows that now it experiences contact, and based on its sensual desire, it's going to see this contact coming through the 6 sense bases as either agreeable or disagreeable. This is when we talk about craving, desire, attachment, longing, yearning, wants, and expectations. This is what it's doing, is the mind is longing, yearning through these sense bases. There's something called internal sense bases and external sense bases. These are referred to sometimes as the doorways to discontentedness, because anytime that the mind's going to become discontent, it's going to be coming through experiencing contact through the 6 sense bases, that there's something that you either see, hear, smell, taste, comes in contact with the body, or some thought or idea that goes through the mind that's going to produce discontentedness. It's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, it's sensual desire, but there would have had to have been contact through the 6 sense bases in order for this to occur. You can't experience discontentedness without some kind of contact coming through these 6 sense bases. So as you learn this, I'm going to explain to you why it's so important to understand this and how you can use some wisdom like this to be able to help you eliminate your sensual desire and your cravings, desires, attachments. So the internal sense bases are referred to as the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and then the mind itself. When we talk about the 6 sense bases in general, we're referring to the internal sense bases of the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind. That's the 6 sense bases. But more specifically, the Buddha refers to them as the internal sense bases. But when he refers to them in general as the 6 sense bases, he's referring to these. These are the doorways to discontentedness. But then there's something called the external sense bases. The external sense bases is whatever the internal sense base is coming in contact with. So the internal sense base is the eye. The external sense base is the physical form. The internal sense base is the ear. The external sense base is the sound. The internal sense base is the nose. The external sense base is the odor. The internal sense base is the tongue. The external sense base is the flavor. The internal sense base is the body. The external sense base is the physical objects. The internal sense base is the mind. The external sense base is the mental object. Okay, so you'll need to understand this when we get to the next piece. Okay, so these are the internal sense bases and the external sense bases. And this is where your central desire is in the mind, is longing, yearning through these sense bases. So the reason why it's important to understand these is because this is how all discontentedness is entering into the mind, and you need to have a guard. You need to guard the doorways. I'll explain to you guys more about what that means with some examples here in a moment. You would like to guard these doorways, protecting your own contentedness. This helps you to further understand the fetter of sensual desire, which ultimately needs to be eliminated in order to get to enlightenment. But to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you don't need to eliminate your sensual desire. You don't even need to thin it out. It will be getting thinned out as a result of the Eightfold Path. But just to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you only need to eliminate the first 3 fetters of personal existence, view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. Your sensual desire will be decreasing as a result of all the other work that you're doing on the path, but it's not required in order to get into the first stage of enlightenment, but it will be occurring. So you need to gather up this teaching and know about the 6 sense bases in order to have everything you need in the first stage of enlightenment to then make your way to enlightenment, because this is where you're gathering up all those teachings. So that's why you need to know the 6 sense bases at this point, because this is what's going to help you to even distance yourself from the sensual desires. That's what you're essentially doing. Even to get into the first jhana, you're going to need to distance yourself from the sensual desires, but you haven't really thinned it out in a significant way, the way you would when you get to the second stage of enlightenment. The second stage of enlightenment, you would have greatly thinned out your sensual desire. Okay, so here, what I'm sharing with you is I'm going to give you some examples so you can understand this. What the mind is doing in the unenlightened state when it has sensual desire is it's longing, yearning through the eyes to see permanently agreeable forms. It wants to see permanently agreeable forms. And when it does, it experiences pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. But it's repulsed by disagreeable forms, and it experiences the painful feelings, which is the sadness, the anger, the frustration, irritation, annoyance, the guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, and those kinds of things. And because of the mind's craving and desire, its longing, yearning through something like the eyes, it wants to see permanently agreeable forms. And when it gets that, it gets those conditioned pleasant feelings. And when it doesn't get it, it gets the painful feelings. So here's an example for you. If you were walking down the street and you saw a mother and child holding hands, and this young child was holding its mother's hands, you might be like, ah, that's so beautiful. Oh man, that's so wonderful. Look at the little kid holding their mom's hand. Oh, that's so lovely, right? And you might get all these conditioned pleasant feelings. You might get so happy from seeing that. But now you walk down the street and you turn the corner and you see a parent slap their child across the face. Oh, maybe your mind is seeing this as disagreeable, and now you're repulsed by that, and now you get angry, you get frustrated. This is because the mind is longing, yearning through the eyes to see permanently agreeable forms. We're not talking about what's wise or unwise here, right? Because in my opinion, it's very unwise to hit anybody, especially a child, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're just talking about what's causing the mind to be discontent here. Why is this happening? Well, it's because the mind is experiencing contact through the eyes. It has longing, yearning within the mind. It's craving permanently agreeable contact. It wants to see permanently agreeable forms. And when it gets what it wants, it gets happy or excited. But when it's not getting what it wants, it experiences these painful feelings. And now it's repulsed by that. This is happening through the eyes. And it's not just with this example, it's any other thing that you're seeing through the eyes, right? And we could come up with a whole litany of examples. You can look in your life and you can see this for yourself in different situations where you've been discontent. There's been certain contact through the eyes where you then experienced either pleasant feelings, painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant. The same thing is happening through the ears. The mind is longing, yearning through the ears to hear permanently agreeable sounds. And when it gets what it wants, it gets those pleasant feelings, happiness, excitement, elation. But then when it doesn't hear what it wants, when it has something disagreeable, some sound that is disagreeable coming through the ears, now it's going to experience the painful feelings. It's going to be repulsed by this, right? So say I'm at the stoplight in my car and somebody pulls up with some music next to me and it's like, oh yeah, that's my jam. All right, let's go. Come on, party, 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 right? We're dancing in our seat, having a good old time, getting all excited. Well, now the light turns green and that person rushes off, and now you go up to the next traffic light and now it's a red light and somebody else pulls up to you with some other music, and now you're like, oh my gosh, that's so horrible, right? And now the mind's hearing that disagreeable sound, right? And now the mind thinks, with its lack of wisdom, that this person is bad, they're so horrible, right? That anger and frustration is coming from your own mind, because your mind has this central desire where you're craving for things to hear through the ear, certain sounds. You want it to be permanently agreeable, where you live in an impermanent world. You can't experience things that are going to be permanently agreeable to you. It's just not possible, right? So as long as your mind has this central desire and it's longing, yearning through the ears for permanently agreeable sounds, there's going to be some situations where you hear things that you agree with, and there's going to be other situations where you hear things you disagree with. And this is just impermanence. That's not the problem. The real true problem is that the mind is discontent. The cause of that problem is your craving, desire, attachment. And you need to eliminate your craving, desire, attachment in order to solve this. As long as you hold on to this craving of only wanting to hear a certain type of music, you can only be happy in that situation. But then when you hear anything else, now your mind's discontent. So this is why if somebody says something to you that's impolite, unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful, you might get angry because you just heard something that is disagreeable to you. And you're not going to be able to experience permanently agreeable sounds coming through the ears. Sometimes people are going to be polite, kind, friendly, respectful, particularly when you're in a community of people like this. But then when you go other places, you're not going to hear those same things, right? So you're going to be hearing things that are disagreeable to you. But if you get rid of that craving and you realize the impermanent nature of the world, and you don't crave for everybody to talk to you in a certain way, now if somebody talks to you in a polite, kind, friendly, respectful way, okay, this is great, wonderful, let's go forward. Somebody talks to you in an impolite, unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful way, your mind's unaffected by that because you don't have this craving for this permanence. You still might not choose to associate with that person. You might still choose to continue to walk on your walk down the street. This person's yelling and hollering, but your mind can be content. Your mind can be peaceful. But if you have a craving for permanently agreeable sounds through the ear, you'll be discontent in that situation where you'll get angry and frustrated. Then there's the nose. That the nose is longing, yearning for permanently agreeable smells and odors through the nose. And then when you experience disagreeable odors, you'll be repulsed by it. So you're walking down the street, you walk past the flower shop, and you smell the odor of the flowers coming out. Wow, smells so good. Wow, that's amazing. But then you walk a few more steps and you get a whiff of the sewer. Ugh, the mind's repulsed by it, right? Because it's craving permanently agreeable odors through the nose. And you're not going to be able to experience that because you live in an impermanent world, right? Now, we have the tongue, that the mind is longing, yearning through the tongue, right? You taste chocolate cake, maybe if you like chocolate cake, and wow, you get so excited, but now you're happy to be eating something at a friend's house. You have no idea what this food is. You put this food in your mouth, and maybe it's sour or bitter or salty or something like this, and now you're repulsed by it. Maybe you have all these nonverbals. Maybe you vocalize this. Maybe you say something unwise, and now your mind's discontent, having frustration or agitation. The mind's craving permanently agreeable flavors on the tongue. Then there's the physical body. Say you're walking down the street, and now you're walking down the street. It's a big sidewalk, wide open. You're pretty much the only one on the sidewalk making your way through the sidewalk. Oh, this is great. But now say you get closer and closer to a crowd and somebody bumps into you and hits you with their shoulder on your shoulder. Now you just experience some disagreeable contact through the body. And now the mind's frustrated and agitated or annoyed. Rather than just realizing this is an impermanent situation and you're not going to be able to navigate the world and never be touched by another being like that these kinds of things will happen, right? The mind can just understand it's impermanent. But if you crave permanently agreeable contact on the body, you'll experience discontentedness. Or say you have a certain fabric that you really like and that you really enjoy having this particular blanket or clothing on the body, and you feel so great with that. But now when you wear this other fabric, maybe like wool or something like that, maybe you feel itchy and scratchy and your mind doesn't like it and you're frustrated by it. That's because the mind's central desire. It's longing, yearning through the body for permanently agreeable contact with physical objects. And you're not going to be able to experience that in your life. Then this same thing is happening with the mind. The mind is longing, yearning through the mind itself for permanently agreeable contact with mental objects. Now, let me talk about this thing of mental objects before I give you the example here. Typically, when we talk about mental objects, what we're talking about is these deeply rooted containers like the 10 fetters that are unwholesome qualities in the mind. This is like the central desire, the ill will, the conceit, things like this. These are deeply rooted containers that are in the mind, and they're typically described by the Buddha in ways that these are unwholesome qualities. But there are wholesome mental objects too. Loving kindness is a wholesome mental object. Compassion is a wholesome mental object. But so most of the time, probably 80-90% of the time, the Buddha is using this term mental object to refer to these deeply rooted containers in the mind. And they can be positive or negative or wholesome or unwholesome, but they're typically described in an unwholesome way. But sometimes he uses this word mental object to mean other things. It can mean like thinking or thoughts or ideas or things like this. So in this particular case, it's that. For example, here, the mind can long and yearn through the mind itself for permanently agreeable contact. So let's just say in the present moment, I'm thinking about the past, and I'm thinking about this time when I was really rich and really wealthy and had all this money and all these cars and motorcycles and houses and friends and all this kind of stuff, all this great food. And now my mind's thinking about that. And now in the present moment, I'm experiencing pleasant feelings because the mind is thinking about this particular mental object. I'm having these thoughts and these memories of this thing in the past. And now I'm having all these pleasant feelings as a result of that. But now in the present moment, I also now start thinking about the past, and I start thinking about some painful things. Maybe I was physically abused or I was sexually abused. Some people call this trauma. It's not actually necessarily trauma. It's just that the mind is holding on to this memory about something in the past. And now when the mind is thinking about this mental object, it's now in the present moment experiencing the painful feelings. So the mind is having this longing, yearning through the mind itself for permanently agreeable thoughts and ideas. And now when the mind thinks about pleasant things from the past, it experiences pleasant feelings in the present moment. But now when we think about particularly painful things that we experienced in the past, now the mind experiences painful feelings in the present moment. And as long as the mind is forming its inner feelings in the present moment based on something in the past or based on something in the future, you can't experience peace and joy in the present moment because it's forming its feelings based on something in the past. So the mind can ultimately eliminate this, where you understand that these things occurred, but you don't form your feelings based on it in the present moment. So you can understand that this being experienced physical abuse or sexual abuse, for example, but you don't need to form feelings based on it in the present moment just because this thing occurred in the past. Sometimes people think when these things have occurred that it's trauma, and now you're going to live with that for the rest of your life, and you're going to be affected by that for the rest of your life. But you can actually train your mind to not form your feelings now in the present moment based on these things that happened in the past, whether they were pleasant things or they were painful things. And the same thing is happening for the future, that the mind can be longing and yearning through the mind itself and thinking about future things in a pleasant way. Like, oh, I can't wait to go to that trip to Australia. This is going to be wonderful. Oh my goodness, I can't wait to go. Now the mind is longing and yearning through the mind itself. You're in a business meeting and now your mind is wandering and thinking about this trip that you're going to be going to Australia or Indonesia or somewhere else. But then also in the present moment, the mind can be longing and yearning. It can be forming these mental objects, having these thoughts or ideas about something very painful that may or may not happen in the future. Maybe you have a business presentation coming up where your mind becomes very anxious and has anxiety and stress. And now you have all this fear that comes into your mind because you know tomorrow you're going to be in front of 100 people, and now you're all shaken up by this. And now you're very fearful and you're having difficulty sleeping at night because the mind is having this disagreeable contact through the mind where you're thinking about this experience you're going to have tomorrow, and now in the present moment you're forming feelings based on something that's going to happen in the future. So this is the sixth sense base. The mind itself can be longing, yearning based on things in the past and based on things in the future. And now you can't experience contentedness and peacefulness and joy in the present moment because you're forming feelings based on the past or based on the future. Okay, so these are the six sense bases. So these mental objects, as I mentioned, they can be these deeply rooted containers that are either wholesome or unwholesome, or sometimes the Buddha uses it as thoughts and ideas, and that's the way we're using it here when we talk about it through the six sense bases. So do you guys have any questions on the six sense bases? Yep.
Sorry. So I spend a lot of time living in this slide.
A lot of people do.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We chase after our sensual desires
Yeah.
in the unenlightened state.
And I'm seeing that this is probably let me know if I'm overreaching, but like the basis for a lot of addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe this is me wanting some like allowable justification for or permission for wanting to move in the direction of things that are agreeable. And I understand that this can go to the far extreme of being attached to it and only being happy when that's present. But in my current view of enlightenment, it seems as though things would be mostly agreeable and lovely and beautiful. And so it feels like if the three are agreeable, disagreeable, and neither agreeable nor disagreeable, I guess I just want permission for it to be neutral or agreeable, but not disagreeable.
Okay, so let me explain. So this is what the unenlightened mind is doing. It's agreeable or disagreeable. There's no neither agreeable nor disagreeable. That's not what I'm describing here. The mind, because of its central desire, whenever it experiences contact through the sense bases, it's going to see things as agreeable or disagreeable. And then that's when it's going to form the conditioned feelings of either pleasant feelings or painful feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant feelings based on agreeable and disagreeable contact. But what you would ultimately like to get to when you purify the mind of its central desire, or where this contact that's coming in, it's neither agreeable or disagreeable, it's just contact. So when you hear that music and you're in the car and you hear that music, it's like, whoa, all right, that's my jam. Like there's no harm in dancing, having a good time with that music, right? But you're not interested in forming a conditioned pleasant feeling. It's about learning how to enjoy this music without allowing the mind to form a conditioned pleasant feeling. And that's something the unenlightened mind doesn't know how to do, how to enjoy something without a conditioned pleasant feeling. It doesn't know how to do that. That's something that it needs to learn how to do. Then when that person comes up with you the music where you previously would have considered to be disagreeable, but now with your central desire gone, it's like, wow, that's not the music that I prefer, but that guy's having a great time and outstanding. Wonderful for him. This is an impermanent situation. Hey, I don't see that sound as being agreeable or disagreeable. It's just contact that comes in, and I'm really pleased that he's having fun or she's having fun, and that's outstanding. Right? And now you can just maintain your contentedness. When someone comes up with the music that you prefer, because you'll have preferences, but it won't be agreeable or disagreeable. It's just like, when I go to a particular restaurant, I might prefer to eat this mushroom burger, right? But if they have pizza, maybe I like pizza, but maybe if someone didn't prefer to eat pizza on that particular day, they could eat pizza and they would be completely content and peaceful with that if they didn't have the mushroom burger, but they prefer to eat the mushroom burger on that day. So you're still going to have preferences, but you're not going to be content or discontent based on these things. So if you went to the restaurant planning to get the mushroom burger and they didn't have the mushroom burger, you're like, oh, no worries, I'll take the pizza. Right? And you can be fine either way. You can be content either way. But if you have central desire in your mind, if they don't have your mushroom burger, you're going to be angry or frustrated, right? So you would like to get to the point where you don't see things as agreeable or disagreeable. It's just contact. And this is where you can get to the point where somebody, when they're bitter and harsh and hostile to you, you just think of it as sounds. These aren't words that I need to feel a certain way about. It's just sounds that are coming into the ears, and I don't need to see this as agreeable or disagreeable. And that's where the mind has been purified of its central desire.
Thank you. That helps a lot. I can't help but feel like my own conditioned behavior is so ingrained. I can't think of a specific issue, but how do you see a way out from that?
That's where the Eightfold Path is. That's the escape. That's what's going to get you out of this, because that's what's training you to eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments. And it's each one of those areas, the wisdom section, the moral conduct section, and the mental discipline section, that you're working with in order to now purify the mind of its central desire. So using the same example, you go into the restaurant. Let's just say this person is unenlightened. They go into the restaurant. They have this craving for the mushroom burger. They go there and they order the mushroom burger, and the food server says, "I'm sorry, sir, we don't have your mushroom burger." And now you notice the frustration coming up as a bodily sensation, and you cut that off and let it go. And now you realize, because of right speech, the last thing you're interested in doing is talking harshly with the food server. And you say, "Oh, I didn't realize you didn't have the mushroom burger. Do you have another option?" Right? Instead of like, "What? You don't have the mushroom burger? What kind of restaurant is this? I'm giving you a negative Google review." Right? That would be the unskillful part of it, right? So you're not interested in doing that. But if you have a craving, that's what it turns out to be, right? For somebody, right? But now if you understand these teachings and you understand you're trying to transform your mind, when you notice the bodily sensation coming up, you cut it off and let it go. And now you go to your right intention, your right speech, and now you talk in a way that's going to produce wholesome karma. And now you trim this craving back more and more and more. So that's why the Eightfold Path is the foundation here for all of this stuff.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So I have a question about mental objects and like the definition of them. As you know, I don't like to ride on the back of a motorcycle. I feel like my decisions are better than most people's, and I would rather make the decisions that determine the fate of the two people on the motorcycle. Is my reluctance to give up the driver's part of being on a motorcycle, is that a mental object in itself?
Yeah, that's coming from the central desire. The mind's clinging and holding on to these aggregates, and now there's a certain central desire that you want to feel a certain thing, like you're in control. So I'm about to talk about here in a little bit about how to solve that, because right now I'm talking about what you're experiencing, and now I'm going to start moving into how to actually solve that exact situation, so I can use that as an example for something I'm going to teach you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Can you go over the mental objects one more time? I have difficulties understanding the sentence here written.
Yeah, the mental objects are mental states.
Okay,
this is how we
this.
typically define a mental object. The way that I'm using it here, when I just described the central desire to you, I'm using it in terms of thinking and thoughts and ideas and things like this. But typically, the way that we're defining it is a mental state, right? Just a mental state. So it could be wholesome or unwholesome. And these mental states are a mental quality which the mind is consistent in the mind, but it can also be dynamic. Meaning, let's take a wholesome one. You'll be able to see it with this. Let's just say loving kindness. Like you have loving kindness in your mind. Like you have a genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. And let's just say it's here, right? So it's consistent. And this mental object is persistent in your mind. You continually have this loving kindness. But it's dynamic in that as you start doing more and more loving kindness meditation, and you start practicing through your intention, speech, and actions loving kindness, this loving kindness is going to be changing. It's going to be growing. It's going to be enhancing over the course of your journey to enlightenment.
Okay, so let's say the amount of it or the amplitude is changing. That is
Yes.
meant by dynamic. Okay, got it. Okay,
exactly. Cool. Yeah.
I'm wondering, so the mind is longing and yearning for the agreeable mental object and state. Now, one could think that for the majority of people, it should be wholeness, peace, happiness, and whatnot. And yet, somehow a large percentage of population is attracted to watching news and horror movies and kind of exposing them to objects or content that is they're exposing their mind to content and whatnot that is somewhat disturbing and maybe negative. So I'm wondering, is it because their mind is so disturbed that is agreeing with what they're seeing, even though it's negative, if you can say it that way.
The problem in this example isn't the content. That's not the problem, because you can watch horror movies, you can watch the news, and you can do this and maintain your contentedness. The cause of the problem is the craving, desire, attachment in the mind. So while somebody's transitioning their mind to enlightenment, they might choose to limit some of those things in order to help them to get rid of their sensual desire. If they're noticing discontent feelings coming up when they're experiencing that contact, they might choose to go away from that. That's what I'm going to talk about next. But they could watch a horror movie or watch the news or even play violent video games and stuff like that, and you could still maintain your contentedness, and you could still not have hatred and anger in your mind. The problem isn't the video game. The problem is the mental object of ill will and the central desire that's in the mind.
Within us, but somehow the world in general is craving those bad news. Even in the news business, they have this saying, like, if it bleeds, it leads. So it's like people are attracted somehow to seeing the conflict, the war, the whatnot. So I'm just wondering why.
That's the central desire. That's what we're talking about. The mind is longing, yearning for certain contact through the eyes or the ears for the news in this case.
A few slides back, you talked about, I think, protect your, guard the doorways to discontentedness, protect your own contentedness. Wouldn't that be a striving for permanence?
By the time your mind gets to enlightenment, you will be experiencing the permanent mental state of those qualities of enlightenment, but you're not craving it. You're not longing, yearning for it. So like he was talking about, people wanting calmness. If you want to be calm, you'll never actually experience calmness, because that's the mind longing, yearning. But you can work towards it as a goal, objective, or interest. So guarding the doorways is something that I'm going to now explain to you guys. I think we're ready to move on. Let me explain this, okay? So this is just a diagram that I created because I was trying to have fun, and a couple years ago I was like, let me make some pictures. I don't have many pictures in my presentations. It's a lot of text, so I decided to put some pictures in here. My son kind of helped me with it too. So here, this is the mind, and there's mental objects, right? And now the mind's craving, it's longing, yearning, and it's using the body, and it's got these doorways of eyes, ears, nose, tongue in the body. So now there's this longing, yearning through the mind in the body, these 6 sense bases, and now it's longing, yearning for all of these things: forms, sounds, odors, flavors, and physical objects and mental objects. Okay, so this is just a picture to help you see what's going on. Okay, let me teach you guys this, and then we'll get to answering your question and some of the other things you guys are bringing up. So the Buddha teaches you that in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you need to understand the cause, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape of these of this central desire. Okay, so the cause of the discontentedness is the craving, the desire, the attachment. We talked about that in the Four Noble Truths, in the 3 poisons, or the 3 unwholesome roots, and the 3 fires. That's the longing, yearning, the mind chasing after the objects of its affection, thinking the next new shiny object waiting around the corner is going to provide lasting satisfaction. This is the unquenchable thirst that the mind has. The disappearance is that when the mind experiences impermanence, this universal truth of impermanence, the mind doesn't like that because it's craving permanence. So the disappearance is that the fact that there's this universal truth of impermanence. The gratification is that the mind is trying to seek gratification through its sensual desire. Due to its lack of wisdom, it has this central desire where the mind's now longing, yearning, and trying to get this gratification. And then the danger in that gratification that the mind's seeking is that it will experience discontentedness. It's going to experience those conditioned feelings, the conditional pleasant feelings. I can only be happy if the weather is this, if my mom and dad does this, if my boss does this, if my salary is this, if I get to go on vacation, if I get to do this, then I will be happy. there's all these conditions, and now the mind's going to experience conditional happiness. So the amount of happiness that you can experience, as long as the mind has sensual desire, becomes less and less and less and less, because there's all these conditions that the mind sets out and says, I can only be happy when these things occur. And then when those things aren't occurring, the danger is that the mind's moving over to these painful feelings, the anger, the sadness, the frustration, agitation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, and so forth. This is the danger of what the mind's experiencing. The escape from all this is the Eightfold Path. That's what's going to teach you how to restrain the mind. It's almost like riding a horse and pulling back the reins. You need to train the mind to not have this craving, desire, attachment. Because if you can eliminate the cause, then you will eliminate the problem of discontentedness. So the escape from all of this is the Eightfold Path. That's going to teach you how to restrain the mind and pull it back. So you're going to need to know this, that the cause of the problem is craving, desire, attachment. The disappearance is the universal truth of impermanence. The gratification is the unenlightened mind's fetter, taint, or pollution of sensual desire, where it's looking for gratification externally. Then there's the danger in that the mind's going to experience conditioned feelings, meaning it's going up and down and up and down and up and down. And then the escape from all of this is the Eightfold Path. That's the complete perfect plan that's going to train the mind of how to no longer do this, so that then you can just experience peace and joy all the time. Okay? So now, getting to some of the things that Sean's talking about, and you as well, is that when you understand how to identify your cravings, desires, attachments, then you can skillfully work with them to eliminate them. The way that I think about this is like the red light on the dashboard of a car. Your discontentedness that you experience, those conditioned feelings, that's like a red light on the dashboard of your car, alerting you that something's wrong, that this mind is not content, this mind is not enlightened. So when you experience conditional feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, or others, this is a time for you to look inward and to be able to see, what is my craving, desire, attachment? Because your mind's going to be longing and yearning through one of these sense spaces. And if you can identify exactly what your cravings are, you can actually go in and almost surgically remove them. Because anytime that you're experiencing discontentedness, it's going to be coming through these 6 sense spaces, and it's triggering some craving, desire, attachment. So if you had a car and it had a red light that came on, you would probably pull over to the side of the road and you would start investigating. Right? And if you had some skills, you'd probably pop your hood and you start looking at some things that were what was going on in this car. But if you didn't have any skills, you would probably take your car to a mechanic, this person who has more wisdom than you about cars, and now they would pop your hood and start looking at what's the problem for this red light. So the same thing is true when you get the red light, when you get the discontentedness, when you get the sadness and the anger and the frustration, you would like to pull over and start to investigate, start to look inward and figure out, what is my cravings, desires, attachments here? My mind is longing, yearning through one of these sense spaces, or maybe more than one. And if you have the skills to be able to identify your cravings, wonderful. And if you don't, you take your mind to the mechanic. The mechanic in this scenario is your teacher. You come talk to your teacher like, hey, I'm having all this frustration and I don't even understand why. I know it's craving, desire, attachment, but I can't figure out which ones. Can you help me? And now, just like I help you to develop meditation practice and the ability to meditate, and those skills are very important, I can teach you how to build this ability to look inward and figure out what your cravings, desires, attachments are. You do this 2, 3, 4, 5 times, you'll be able to do it on your own, because you can't be dependent on me, because I'm impermanent in your life. I can teach you the skills and how to do this, but then you're going to have to be able to look inward and figure these out for yourself. So I'm going to walk you through this of how you actually do this. Whenever discontentedness occurs, you need to see it as this red light on your dashboard. In that moment, cut it off and let it go. Don't even think twice about it. Whenever you're noticing the bodily sensations coming up, cut it off and let it go. You know that there's some underlying craving, but now's not the time to look at that. So just cut it off and let it go. This is using your right mindfulness to guard the mind. And now when you see this discontentedness coming up as a bodily sensation, you cut it off and let it go. That's applying right effort to bring the mind back. And I gave you an example of that, of like if you're watching the news and you're noticing this bodily sensation coming up where the tightening of the chest, the tightening of the throat, the heat in the face, the pressure in the skull, you know you're about to get frustrated. Just turn off the news and go somewhere else. Redirect the mind, go somewhere else, right? That's going to help you to cut that off and let it go. So that's the first step. Then the second one is now when the mind's calm, a few hours later, a few days later, you look inward, you start to reflect. What were the cravings, desires, attachments here? Oh, I was longing through the eyes and the ears for the world to be permanently safe or permanently peaceful. We're not talking about what would be wonderful. It'd be wonderful if the world was peaceful and safe and the whole world was like that. But that's not the world we live in. We live in an impermanent world. So now when you've seen this content in the news of somebody getting murdered or raped or a war broke out or something like that, you're seeing and hearing something that's disagreeable to you. You've got this underlying craving for the world to be safe, the world to be peaceful. There's this underlying craving there in just this example. So now when you look inward and you reflect and you see that the mind is craving and longing and yearning here, now you go to the next one, which is you need to develop a plan to eliminate this specific craving that is causing the discontentedness to arise. Of course, you need to maintain your consistent practice of breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity, because that's generally knocking down your cravings, desires, attachments. But then now you can almost surgically remove this particular craving. So what you might decide to do in this example, someone getting irritated and frustrated about the news, you would probably like to distance yourself from the news for a period of time, where you go an extended period of time without looking at the news. And that might be a couple of months, might be a couple of weeks. Most likely it's going to be a couple of months, because oftentimes that craving is very deep. And now after you've gotten to the point where you've distanced yourself, you're no longer experiencing this contact. So this contact that was arising discontentedness, you distance yourself from it for several months. And now when you go several months without seeing it, now at some point you might start to slowly reintegrate this back into your life. But you do it little by little. You might bring it in for 5 minutes and kind of start watching it, and then you turn it off and you don't watch it for another 3 or 4 days. Right? And you just kind of observe the mind and see how the mind experiences that. Then maybe you watch it again, and you watch it for maybe 8 minutes or 10 minutes. And then you go away from it for 3 or 4 or 5 days and just kind of see how does the mind deal with that. And now you just kind of slowly reintegrate it after you've gone this long period of time without it. Okay. And then you repeat this. Okay. So now let me give an example with Sean, right? Like, so somebody says, "Hey, Sean, would you like to ride on my motorbike?" And this is before you realized that you had the craving, and you're like, "Okay, sure." You jump on the motorbike, and now you're riding down the street and you notice all this fear or whatever it is. I don't know what the emotion is, but there's some feeling that comes up, and you notice that in the moment you'd like to cut it off and let it go, right? You keep cutting that off and cutting it off and cutting it off. And now what you would like to do in that situation is distance yourself from this for a period of time, not do it for a period of time, train the mind to let it go. But then you'd like to slowly integrate it back into your life. Somebody that you trust, somebody that you feel that you could trust, let them just drive you around the corner, like around the block, and just do just a little bit of it, right? Where you're not going on a 30-minute ride out to Sungopang or 45-minute ride out to Sungopang, but just like around the block, little bits and pieces of it. And now you do that and you kind of get comfortable with that. You desensitize the mind and you start training it like, hey, riding around on a motorbike, on the back of someone's motorbike, doesn't mean I'm going to get injured or frustrated. So you need to replace this conditioning where the mind thinks that there's something bad that's going to happen if I drive on a motorbike, to replacing it with thoughts of, wow, I can do this safely and I can be comfortable here. So you might have to gradually increase this, where someone you trust takes you around the block and that's one day. And now you wait 3, 4, 5, 6 days, and then maybe you go a little bit farther the next time. And then you wait 3, 4, 5, 6 days and you go a little bit farther. And then each time you're starting to realize like, whoa, I can do this comfortably and safely. And that's how you would eliminate that craving. Because if you just avoid it, if you just try to push it away, then the mind still has the craving, and there's going to be fear or whatever else is coming up in that situation. You would like to stamp this out and get rid of it so you can be liberated and free from that. I'll give you an example from my life on this one. one time I was driving down the road and I was in my wife's truck and I reached down for my mobile phone and I realized that I didn't have my mobile phone with me. And I noticed this fear coming up in my mind. So the first thing I did is cut it off and let it go. And I was sitting at a red light when this was happening. And my first thought was to turn around and go get the phone. I wanted to get the phone because the mind was craving permanence. It wanted the phone to be permanent. And I realized that no, this isn't going to solve the problem. So I decided to continue on my day because I needed to distance myself from the phone because the mind wanted the phone to be permanent. So I went on my day and I was only supposed to be outside for like an hour and a half that day, but I extended my time outside. I went to the movies. I went to go get something to eat. I did all these different things. And I was outside for about 5 or 6 hours. And then when I came home, I didn't just go run to the phone. I actually went home, spent time with my son. I think we played little video games or something. And then after about 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, I went and looked at the phone. And I was like, oh, okay, I got a few messages. Let me take care of that, right? So now I distance myself from this and train my mind that you're not going to always have the phone. I waited about 2 or 3 days, and then I intentionally left the phone at home. And when I went outside, I felt awkward. It felt weird to be outside without a phone, right? But I did it, and I went outside and I did a bunch of things. And then I waited another 2 or 3 or 4 days, and I did it again. I went outside without the phone. And now I felt pretty comfortable, and I felt like the craving, desire, attachment was gone. So then I started taking my phone out again. And then after about 2 months or so, I accidentally left my phone at home again. And I was driving down the road and I reached for my phone and it wasn't there. And I was like, oh, well, and I just kept on going. There was no fear. There was no nothing. And that's how I knew I'd let go of the craving, desire, attachment, because previously when I reached down for the phone, there was fear right away. It came up in the mind. But now after having desensitized my mind to this and training it that the phone is not permanent, several times later when I reached for it, not realizing that I left it at home, there was no fear. And I had a pretty good indication that I had eliminated my craving to my phone. Well, then a year later, I had a phone, that same phone, and I accidentally dropped it. And the phone screen crashed and it shattered right away. And I looked at the phone and I started laughing and I was like, yep, this phone's impermanent. Sure is. That makes sense. The phone's broken. And fortunately, my wife had another phone and I just used her phone. I didn't have to go buy one, right? And I wasn't upset. I wasn't angry. I wasn't frustrated. So I could see that the mind had eliminated its attachment to the phone. So there's a good chance that you might be attached to your phone. So you might decide to do this kind of thing where you leave it at home sometimes intentionally and go outside. And it's going to feel awkward. It's going to feel strange because that sensual desire, it wants to have this physical object with you permanently. You're going to need to get comfortable going outside without your phone because it's not permanent. So you might decide to do this several times until you feel like your mind has eliminated that craving, desire, attachment. And this is where the concentration and the focus and the clarity actually comes into the mind. When we talk about that benefit, or one of the benefits of enlightenment being the focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory, it's because you're eliminating your cravings, desires, attachments. The meditation and focusing on the breath, that is helping you to develop concentration, but it's because it's helping you to eliminate your cravings, desires, attachments. It's not that the mind is necessarily magically getting some kind of concentration. It's because if you have craving in your mind, it's like carrying around a burden, and now your mind is longing, yearning in all these different directions. It's like you're at the stoplight and you're listening to the music and you're longing, yearning for that. You're checking out that beautiful woman or that handsome man over there. You're looking at the view. You're looking at the billboards. The mind's being pulled in all these different directions, and it can't have focus and concentration. So when you're getting rid of these cravings in the mind where it's no longer longing, yearning, and pulling, then you can be focused and concentrated. So that's why it's so important to eliminate these cravings, because as long as the mind is pulling in these directions, it's going to want something to be permanent, and you can only be happy when you get it. And when you don't get it, you're going to experience the painful feelings. But you're also going to experience what's called a muddled mind. This is the word of the Buddha. He calls it a muddled mind, when the mind's lacking concentration because the mind's pulling in all these different directions. And you would like to get to the point where your mind's not doing that. Okay, I'll give you another example of how you can use these 6 sense bases to help you. Okay, there was a period of time where I realized that caffeine wasn't helpful for the mind. And every time I drank caffeine, my mind went to this excited state. and I decided that I was going to get rid of caffeine, and I started to distance myself from the caffeine. And I would go 3, 4, 5 days without a coffee, and then I would end up having one. I would have terrible headaches. I'd be in bed for a couple of days, and I regretted having that coffee. But then I would kind of double down and kind of aim to improve, and I would go like 5, 6, 8, 7, 10 days without coffee, and then I'd have another one, and then I'd beat myself up about it. Why'd you do that? That's so silly. You know this is going to harm your mind. Why are you doing that? But the craving was too strong, so I kept having a coffee every once in a while. But then I would go maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and I would have a coffee. I'd be like, why'd you do that? Man, you were doing so good. Why didn't you just not drink it? You beat yourself up a little bit, but then I'm like, all right, I'm going to get back into this. So then I went as long as 8 weeks without a coffee, and I was feeling all conceitful, and I was like, wow, look at me getting rid of all these cravings. My mind's getting more concentrated. Wow, this feels great. I'm going to get to enlightenment. Wow, right? And now I'm walking down the street. I turn the corner. I'm in Chiang Mai. I turn the corner, and I get a whiff of the coffee coming out of the coffee shop. And boom, I'm standing in line at the coffee shop, right? And there's people in front of me, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, why are you doing this? You're going to have headaches. This is so stupid. You've already gotten rid of this. Why are you doing this? I'm sitting there talking to myself the whole time I'm waiting in line. I get up to the front of the line. Iced coffee, please, right? Just a little bit of ice, right? She makes my drink. I take my drink. I go sit down, and I start drinking it. I get about a third or about a half a way through the glass of coffee, and I just decided, this is it. I'm done. And I threw it away, and I've never had a coffee since. But when I looked at that, and I was like, what happened? Man, I was doing so good. 8 weeks of no coffee. What was it? Of course, I knew it was sensual desire, but what was it? And I was like, it was that odor through the nose that triggered the craving, and now I was into the coffee shop. I see exactly what happened, right? So now, having that wisdom of the 6 sense bases, I started making different decisions. Because remember, everything's cause and effect. It's decisions that you're making that's leading to any particular result. So now, understanding the 6 sense bases, and it was the odor that pulled me into the coffee shop, I started becoming more wise. I was like, okay, well, I had that little coffee. Now I'm going to get back on this. So what I would do is I would walk down the street, and I would look really far ahead of me. And if I saw a coffee shop, I would switch to the other side of the street. Now, when I walked down the other side of the street, I wouldn't get the odor, right? And I had to do this for a couple of months until I extinguished the craving, because my mind was sensitive. It still had that craving. I had to distance myself from this. And because I knew it was the odor that pulled me in, all I needed to do was distance myself from that odor. So by going to the other side of the street and doing that for a few months, I eventually extinguished the odor. And now there was a point in time where one of my students was like, hey, I'd like to talk to you. Can I have a personal guidance session? I said, sure. Where would you like to meet? He's like, oh, there's this great coffee shop. Can you meet me at the coffee shop? And I was like, yeah, I can meet you at the coffee shop. So I went to the coffee shop, and I sat there, and I smelled the odor, and it was just fine, because the craving was gone, right? It didn't pull me in. I knew with wisdom that it's unwise for me to be able to drink this coffee. So I went there, I ordered my glass of water or my bottle of water or smoothie or whatever it was that I ordered, and there was no craving. There was no longing, yearning, and I was able to sit there, and I didn't order any coffee, right? So it's understanding these 6 sense bases that I was able to surgically figure out what exactly triggered that craving, and what can I now do differently to experience different results. So by understanding these 6 sense bases, you can figure out exactly what doorway you experience the contact with, and now you can change what it is that you're experiencing. And that's how you can work on these particular cravings and extinguish the central desire slowly but surely. You still need the breathing mindfulness meditation and the generosity to be gradually training the mind. You still need the whole entire eightfold path. But once you understand the 6 sense bases, you can really look at it in a fine-tooth comb and really work to eliminate your central desire in this way. So any questions on this one? Yep. And by the way, did that answer your question, sir? I don't remember your question anymore, but you had a question, and I was thinking that this was going to answer that. Okay, good.
So I always like to make these things super practical. And so Could we go back through those couple of examples and talk about what's number one, what's number two, etc.?
These three or these four.
Right.
Okay,
So on the phone, the discontentedness occurs. You notice that the phone's not in your pocket.
Mm-hmm. That's where you're cutting off and letting go.
Right.
Not even thinking twice about it. Just boom.
And then you reflect on the cravings. That's the desire for impermanence.
Looking inward and trying to figure out, what is the mind craving here? Why did that fear just come up in my mind? What led to that fear? There was some craving.
Right.
What was the craving for permanence? The mind's craving for that phone to be permanent.
Okay.
It's wanting that physical object to be in, touching the body.
Yeah. Then develop a plan. And first you thought maybe go back. That was going to be the plan. And then you realized the better plan was to just live without it, to get away from the craving, right?
Yeah, going back to the phone was just feeding the craving.
Mm-hmm.
It's feeding that monster. The mind wanted that phone to be permanent, and going back to get the phone wasn't going to eliminate the craving. That was just going to feed it. So I had to distance myself from it and break it.
And then repeating the process is, avoiding the phone at other times as well.
Repeating the process is, so we didn't talk about number 3. Number 3 is developing the plan.
The plan was to, I thought, leave the phone.
Yes, leave the phone, but then also all those subsequent situations where I went 2 or 3 days and then I intentionally left the phone at home.
Okay.
And then I didn't go back to the phone right away when I got home. I did other things first.
Yeah.
Right. And I did that for 2 or 3 times. That was part of the plan.
Right.
Is that it wasn't just that one situation, it was subsequent situations intentionally leaving the phone at home.
Right.
That was part of the plan too.
Right.
Repeating the process is for each individual instance of discontentedness, now do the same exact thing. Yeah. So now, I don't know, the coffee, right? Yeah. I smell the coffee and now I need to do some plan here.
I feel like this is really linked to the Four Noble Truths.
It is.
Yeah,
It's
the practical version of the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah, it's how to apply it and make sure that you're eliminating your cravings, desires, attachments in a step-by-step tangible way. Yeah. Because what you learn in the foundational classes is just the Eightfold Path and kind of generally training the mind, because you got to get that underway for several months first.
Right.
Right. And that's going to help soften up the mind. But then once you've done all that foundational stuff, now it's like going in and surgically removing these cravings. And the mind's ready to let these things go because you've done enough of the breathing mindfulness meditation and generosity and all that other stuff. I
continue to have some challenges applying this pattern in the moments when I become discontented. And so I guess I just am trying to go over and over the examples it's in.
So one of the things that I will do is when students come to me and they talk privately, because that's usually what they would like to do with some of these cravings, is once you've learned this in the class, now when you come to me and say, oh, David, I'm having this problem with my friend who came, whatever you might be experiencing, now I can show you using this methodology how to apply to your specific situation, and then it will make even more sense to you.
Can I go through one more?
Sure.
Remember the turkey sandwich affair?
I don't remember that.
Okay. I was volunteering.
Oh, yes.
The boss had turkey sandwiches. It was just 3 of us in a small room working. And the boss said to his regular employee, hey, I have some turkey sandwiches. They're in the refrigerator. Go get yourself one. And didn't offer one to me. So I became discontented. So that's number 1. I didn't cut it off, but
let's just say you did.
I'm unskilled.
Let's just say you did.
Okay. So then I reflect on the cravings, desires, attachments. The craving is for other people to be polite, kind, friendly, and respectful.
According to you.
According to me. Yeah.
According to your expectations.
Okay. Then to develop a plan to eliminate the specific craving, desire to not be attached to other people, being polite, kind, friendly, and respectful according to me.
the plan would be that you would like to put your mind in that situation over multiple situations, multiple times, in order to give the mind the opportunity to now experience that. This particular plan works in a good 80 or 90% of the situations, but there's certain situations where you can't induce that.
Sure.
But over time, if you spend time in your day-to-day life, it's going to happen. Someone's going to... Rachel, would you like to go to lunch with me today? I'd like to buy you some food. I'm not going to invite Claire. Right? So that's the way that it would have to like induce, right? Yeah. That we'd have to induce it like that, right?
Yeah.
So you can't do that, right? You physically don't have the ability to do that, right? So you're going to just need to keep this one in mind and just keep cutting this off and cutting it off. So, and if you are working in a volunteer environment, this could potentially happen, but you can't really induce it.
Right.
But a lot of the other ones you can.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
The plan would be just keep being attentive to the mind, and when these situations occur, train your mind to cut it off and let it go the moment it happens.
Yeah.
Yep.
On Sunday this week, I got uncomfortable, discontented for some reason, and I haven't been able to figure out what happened, but I've basically been attending class from my apartment because I couldn't be around people. So do you have tips on like how to explore what happened in a moment where it's desire and attachment was?
Yeah, I could ask you some different questions to be able to figure that out, so we can talk if you like. Are you going on the excursion today? Yeah. Okay, so we can talk maybe in the van or when we get to Hua Tung Tao. You guys can always come talk to me during these things. Or if we don't have an opportunity during the excursion, we can do it another time if you're going to be around. Yeah. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm kind of interested in the first point you are making about cutting it off. It's almost like you make it seem so easy and clean in a way. And also I'm curious, in example, you're talking about your phone, your coffee. What if the coffee and the phone, they're kind of running towards you? They're not like inanimate, right? They're kind of sticky to you. Because in your example, it's almost like ideal, right? Because you left it there, you're able to cut it off really cleanly. My question is kind of, in my situation, where I'm aware of other people's yawning and their energy, they're trying to like stick to me, their attachment towards me. Like maybe in my case, they're like family or friends, some kind of relationship. They are like toxic to me, or I want to run away from them almost. But how do you kind of, the cutting off with human, it's not like with a phone or coffee, right? It's kind of dynamic. So in this case, like, I would not, like either I could choose never be in contact with those people again. But I'm more thinking about like in reality, your surrounding, you have to live with those people. You cannot eliminate those people from your life forever. So in this case, like how do you approach applying the number one principle, like about the cutting off?
Sure. So if you remember that coffee example, when I was talking about how I kept going back to the coffee over and over and over again, it's really not cut it off and let it go. It's in the moment you're cutting it off and letting it go. But then the craving came back up, because it's kind of like a candle that you blow it out and you think it's out, but then the flame flares back up, right? So it's really cut it off and 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 cut it off. And after many, 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 many times, my mind finally let go of the craving to coffee, right? It took many, 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 many times. So it's not as clean as what your mind's thinking. There's multiple times that you're cutting off any one particular craving. Some of these cravings, you can cut them off one time and then it's gone, it's out of the mind. And the more that your mind matures in terms of developing it with breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and generosity. That's why we practice generosity frequently every day. That's why we practice meditation frequently every day, because you need to mature the mind. It's called, the Buddha refers to it as maturing and release, that the mind needs to mature and mature and mature and mature, and then it will release the actual craving, desire, attachment. So this Eightfold Path needs to be well underway and well practiced in order for the mind to mature enough that it's willing to let go. And in situations where there's a relationship, these are oftentimes deeply held attachments that the mind has is in a relationship. And it needs to first have the Eightfold Path really well underway, which includes breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and lots of generosity. And then that needs to mature before you can actually let go. These relationships that you're having, that you're referring to as toxic, they're not toxic to you. It's that your craving, desire, attachment in your mind is causing discontent feelings. It's not the other person who's causing your mind to experience the painful feelings. It's the mind itself causing this. Some of the deeply held cravings are the people who are closest to you. So there's another technique that I don't typically teach in this retreat, but I'll share it with you guys. This is how you eliminate an attachment to someone who's close to you. There's multiple things that you can do, but the thing that's the most helpful, that's really going to target an attachment to a human being or even like an animal or something like this, if you have a pet, is to do something called contemplation of death, or reflection of death. This is where you sit quietly, maybe for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and you close your eyes and you envision that mom and dad have died, or brother or sister has died, or your pet has died. You're not aspiring for them to die. You don't want them to die. It's just you play it out in your mind, because this is the biggest amount of impermanence that you could ever experience in a relationship, is somebody dying. So if you can sit for like 10, 15, 20 minutes and kind of envision that maybe the police have called you, or a family member has called you, informed you of their death, and now you play it out in your mind. You're not planning it. And again, you're not aspiring for them to die, but you just envision that they've actually have died. You kind of convince the mind that these people have died, and you play that out. And you get all the way to the point where, 15, 20 minutes into this visualization within the mind, you're now living life again without them in your life. And you might actually grieve during this process. You might actually feel sorrow and despair as you're doing this with the mind. And that means that the mind's craving is being triggered, because what you're doing in your relationships is you're expecting this person to be a certain way. You're craving for them to be a certain way. And what you would like to do is train your mind to understand the impermanent nature of this being, and that they're not going to be permanent in your life. And you're going to need to do this more than one time. And you usually space it out a good month between them, because you're going to need time to regain your composure. And that's why the breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and all the other factors of the Eightfold Path should be well underway before you do something like this. You wouldn't be interested in just going off and doing this, because you would like to have some tools and techniques to help you regain your composure. So if somebody's been doing the Eightfold Path for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and now they would like to work on a particular attachment to a friend or family member or something like this, then they could do contemplation of death to be able to help them. And now they do that multiple times. Ultimately, you would like to get to the point where you've done it a few times and you don't have any grief, you don't have any sadness, you don't have any sorrow. And this is going to help the mind to eliminate its craving of wanting this person to be a certain way. So if brother or sister is being rude and hostile and bitter to you, you just understand that they're impermanent because you've trained your mind to do this. But if you are noticing any discontentedness, even at this point in time, you could be cutting that off and letting it go. And you could choose to eliminate contact, because it's the contact through the six sense bases that is causing the mind to experience that discontentedness. It's the craving, desire, attachment, but it's the contact. So if you were, say, at a family event and one of your family members is being what you would consider to be disrespectful, rather than sit there and argue with them and try to tell them that they're being disrespectful, just walk away. Eliminate your contact. And now just walk away, go to another room, go outside, spend 30 minutes or an hour doing something else, let your mind calm down, and now come back into the situation. But over time, what you would like to do proactively to eliminate this is the contemplation of death.
Yeah, this has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. So you guys know that I normally take a mid-morning break around 10:30 or 11. I've just been teaching because I know that you guys are taking your own break, which is fine. Go ahead and take your break. And if you are use the bathroom, do whatever you guys need to do. You guys know that I don't have any rules or anything like that. You guys can do whatever you like. But since you guys are asking the questions that you are, I thought I would just keep with your questions and really help you guys as best as I can through everything that you guys are asking. We have some questions coming in here online. We have one from Mark. Mark is asking, after hearing your coffee story, am I right to understand that we are not just cutting out the mind's cravings, attachments, and desires, but also the senses? You're not cutting off the senses, but you're understanding that your discontentedness is going to come through these doorways. So your mindfulness, your awareness of mind, you're watching over the mind and you're being aware of any contact that's coming in through these. So that's why, like this example, if you're in a relationship where somebody is being bitter and harsh and hostile, you need to be aware, like, I'm having contact through the eyes and the ears here. Now let me step away from this. Let me eliminate contact. That's going to help me to eliminate my craving, desire, attachment. So you're not doing anything with the senses other than being aware of them and then controlling the amount of contact that you have through them at any given time. Mark's asking, how would this best be done in everyday life? Okay, so I gave examples of that. For example, if we smell coffee, would we shut out any sensory reaction? Yes, like on that, oh, that's nice, or oh, that's bad. Yes, that's, you would like to not judge it as being good or bad. That's going to help you to not have the agreeable or disagreeable contact. Is this why Shaolin monks put themselves through painful practices? Hope that helps. I don't know much about Shaolin monks other than I used to practice Shaolin Kung Fu a little bit, but those painful things that they're doing, you know, that's not what's going to lead to enlightenment, is putting the body into painful situations. The Buddha did that initially, and he realized that that doesn't lead to enlightenment. So if that's what they're choosing to do, and that's the reason why, then I wouldn't suggest that they do that, but that's their practice. You'd have to talk to them about why they do that and those kinds of things. But putting the physical body in pain is not going to lead to enlightenment. That's not how you would get to enlightenment. Okay. All right. So let's go on here because there's more to share with you guys. And I think I've shared most of these things already just through our talk. Let me just look at them. Yeah, I've shared most of these things. So this is where I normally would have taken a break, but now because we have some more to talk about, let me teach you guys dependent origination. Okay, and as I mentioned, if you guys would like to take a little break, feel free to take a little break. So dependent origination is the highest, most ultimate truth of the teachings of the Buddha, and you would need to know this in order to get to the first stage of enlightenment. And ultimately, to get to enlightenment, you're dismantling dependent origination. You're breaking up all the causes and conditions that are leading to what the Buddha is describing here. He's going to describe to you how beings come into the world and experience rebirth over and over and over again. And he's going to show you the details of exactly how and why you keep experiencing discontentedness over and over and over again. So there's these 12 interlinking steps that you're going to learn about, and you're going to understand that ignorance is the cause and condition that's leading to craving and clinging and ultimately anger. And by cultivation of wisdom, you're eliminating craving and clinging and eliminating anger. So let me just jump ahead. Just a little recap for those of you guys that may not have been here and those of you guys that were here, is that what craving is, this is the longing, the yearning, the mind looking for satisfaction externally. The anger is those painful feelings that come up in the mind based on its cravings, and now the mind will tend to be unskillful. It'll be bitter, harsh, and hostile through your intention, speech, and actions because the mind's cravings aren't getting fulfilled. And where this is all coming from is the mind's ignorance or the lack of wisdom. I don't use this word ignorance, but I use it because other people use it just to show you where their teachings plug into what I'm teaching. A better way to think of this is the unknowing of true reality, the confusion, the misunderstanding, where the mind just doesn't understand what it doesn't understand. The mind will firmly believe in the unenlightened state that other people are causing you to be angry. You'll firmly believe that because of the lack of wisdom, because of the unknowing of true reality. The mind doesn't doesn't see that it's truly because of craving that anger is occurring. Okay, so we talked about this in detail earlier in the retreat. So now I'm going to talk to you about a simplified version of dependent origination, but then I'm going to take you into the detailed version of dependent origination. So here, the Buddha teaches you this. He says, when this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. Okay? When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the elimination of this, that ceases. So what he's showing you is this cause and effect. Okay, that this event leads to this event, and when this event occurs, it leads to this event, and when this event occurs, it leads to this event. Here's an example. Because you chose to learn English, for example, but you could insert any language here, German, Chinese, or whatever. Because you chose to learn English, you can apply for a job. When you apply for a job, you get a job interview. When you get a job interview, you get a job offer. When you get a job offer, you can accept the job. When you accept the job, you get a paycheck. And when you get a paycheck, you can buy clothes. When you buy clothes, you can go outside. When you go outside, you can meet friends. And when you meet friends, when you have a problem, you now have somebody to talk to, right? All of this occurred because you chose to learn English. You wouldn't have been able to make friends and have somebody to talk to if you wouldn't have learned English. Okay, so there's this cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, this sequence of events that's leading to a particular thing, right? And conversely, if you did not learn English, you would not be able to get a job interview. If you did not get a job interview, you would not get a job. If you didn't get a job, you wouldn't get a paycheck. If you didn't get a paycheck, you wouldn't be able to buy clothes. And if you didn't buy clothes, you wouldn't be able to go outside. And if you weren't able to go outside, you wouldn't be able to make friends. And now if you don't have friends, when you have a problem, you're not going to have somebody to talk to, right? So there's this cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect that leads to a certain event. But also, if you eliminate this first event, then all these subsequent events are not going to occur because they're all eliminated because you eliminated the first event. Okay, this is a very simplified version of showing this cause and effect, cause and effect. This is what the Buddha calls causality, that you will see this causality with the natural law of karma, this cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. So now I'm going to show you dependent origination as the Buddha taught it, which is going to show you why beings keep coming into the world over and over and over again, and why you keep experiencing discontentedness. You understand already that it's craving, desire, attachment that's leading to your discontentedness, but there's other things that are leading to it. This is the detailed work. Okay, so what the Buddha is teaching you is that because of ignorance, this is the unknowing of true reality, because of the lack of wisdom, a being is going to make choices and decisions, volitional formations. Those choices and decisions are either going to be wise or unwise. So now with those unwise decisions, the mind is now going to have craving, desire, attachment in the mind. That craving, desire, attachment is going to lead to the forming of a consciousness. This is the fuel that leads to a consciousness. Now, when there's a consciousness, the mind is going to need to find what's called a name and form. Name and form is the physical body. I'll show you guys this in a moment, but for now, just think about it as the physical body. If there's a consciousness, if there's a mind, it's going to need to find the physical body to exist in. Now, when that consciousness has come together with the physical body, it's going to form the 6 sense spaces. That's the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself. It's going to have those 6 sense spaces. When the being has these 6 sense spaces, it's now going to experience contact through those 6 sense spaces. The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body, and the mind itself. Then when it has those contact, it's going to experience feelings. There's going to be pleasant feelings, painful feelings, or feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. Now, having experienced those feelings, the mind's going to now crave. It's going to long and yearn. It's going to want these pleasant feelings to be permanent. Now, when the mind's longing and yearning with this craving, it's now going to cling, and it's going to want to hold on to those pleasant feelings. Now, with the clinging, there's going to be an existence where now this being exists in the womb. And now, with this existence, there's going to be birth. This being's going to be born into the world. Then when there's birth, there's going to be aging and death. And then there's going to be sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. That's how this whole mass of discontentedness comes about. So if it wasn't for ignorance, this whole thing wouldn't occur. So one of the ways to think about this is like a math equation, that ignorance plus craving equals discontentedness. That because the mind lacks wisdom, it continues to make unwise decisions over and over and over and over again. And one of those unwise decisions is it hasn't been purified. It hasn't experienced the purification of the mind. It still has these pollutions in the mind. So because of those unwise decisions, it's leading to continued consciousness over and over and over again. If you have logs that are on a fire and these logs are burning, now, as long as there's fuel, which is the logs, it's going to send off a spark. And that spark is going to be carried by the wind. And now it lands and it ignites a new fire. It lights a new fire. And now that's a completely new fire. So in the mind, the Buddha describes in other teachings that craving, desire, attachment is fuel. That's the spark that's leading to the creation of a new consciousness. And if there's that spark at the end of this life, if there's craving in the mind, that's the spark that leads to the creation of the new consciousness. And now when there's a new consciousness, it's going to need to find a name and form. Okay, so the name and form, here I'll show you, this is the words of the Buddha when he talks about name and form. What he's explaining is that name and form is feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are 3 of the 5 aggregates, and consciousness is a 4th one. Those are essentially 4 of the 5 aggregates. And then there's contact. Then he describes form as something called the 4 great elements. What he's referring to here is the earth, water, wind, and fire elements. This is how they would describe the physical body during the time of the Buddha, where now we describe it as cells and molecules and atoms and things like that. We have scientific representations of it, but they use this traditional system of referring to it in elements. The earth element are the solids of the body, like your fingernails, your teeth, your bones, your hair. These are all solids of the body. The water element is like the tears, the saliva, the urine, the pus. These are all the blood. This is all water element. The fire element is associated with the heat of the body, the temperature of the body, and the digestion. And then the wind element is how things move through the body. So like the feces moving through the colon or the blood moving through the vein. That movement is the wind element. So they would diagnose the body through this 4 element system where you have an increased earth element or a depleted wind element or a neutral water element and so forth and so on. And it's still in place today. In traditional Thai medicine, they use this 4 element theory to diagnose the body and then apply remedies through herbal medicine. This is how they diagnose and treat through this 4 element system. So this is what was in place during the lifetime of the Buddha. And that's whenever you see him talking about these 4 great elements, he's talking about the physical body. So here, what name and form is its form is the body, and then name is all of these other things. Essentially, the way you should think about this is just the physical body. It's an easy way to just think about this. You don't actually need to know this level of detail, but I show it to you so that you at least understand it and what it is. And then from this point forward, what I suggest you do is just think about name and form as the physical body. So that now when you're looking at dependent origination, you can understand that this lack of wisdom is leading to these volitional formations that are uninformed, and it's producing unwise decisions that are leading to unwholesome results in an individual's life. And now that's called unwholesome karma. And now part of that is that there's a consciousness that is being formed. And now whenever there's a consciousness, it's going to need to find a physical body. This is where the consciousness now comes into the womb, right? And now that consciousness has come together with a physical body. Then when there's a physical body, there's going to be the forming of the 6 sense bases. That's the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body, and then the mind itself. And then there's contact through those 6 sense bases. And now when there's contact, there's going to be feelings that arise. Then the mind's going to have craving, which is the longing and yearning. Then when it's experiencing that, there's going to be clinging, where the mind's holding on to it, wanting it to be permanent. Then there's this existence of this being in existence. Then there's this birth where the baby is born into the world. And now if there's birth, there's going to be aging and death. That's the nature of impermanence of the physical body. Then because of all of these other factors, you're also experiencing sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. This is how discontentedness comes about. So the way that you look at dependent origination is you understand the number one problem that every single living being is experiencing that is unenlightened is ignorance. The unknowing of true reality, not in a derogatory way. That's the word that people are using, the ignorance. I suggest you think of this as the unknowing of true reality, the lack of wisdom. Because the mind lacks wisdom, it stays stuck in this continuous cycle of rebirth over and over. Keep experiencing anger and sadness and frustration over and over because it lacks the wisdom to understand that it's craving and clinging that is causing these feelings. So what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're working to eliminate this ignorance. You're looking to eliminate this unknowing of true reality. And the way that you do that is through the cultivation of wisdom. That's why you're taught to not believe any of the teachings, because you can't get to wisdom through belief. Because belief, you don't know what's true or false. You're just believing it because somebody convinced you to believe it, or you've convinced yourself to believe it. So you would like to cultivate wisdom. And that's why you're learning, examining, and investigating. You're reflecting to independently verify the teachings, and then you're practicing, integrating them into your day-to-day life and training your mind. And now you'll have the wisdom to know true reality. So the way that you get to the elimination of discontentedness is you need to eliminate the first cause and condition that is producing this whole sequence of events. If you can eliminate the first cause and condition of ignorance, then you'll eliminate the last one, which is discontentedness. So that's why you're focused on the cultivation of wisdom, investigating and examining the teachings, reflecting on them to independently verify them, and then practice them. And that's what's going to lead to the complete liberation of the mind. As long as there's this ignorance in the mind, this unknowing of true reality, then there's going to continue to be each one of these subsequent events occurring. Okay, so now let me take it from this way, okay? Let me show you this diagram, actually. I think this will help. All right. So now, because of the past causes in the past life, there was ignorance and there was volitional formations that were occurring in a past life. These are past causes that an individual is experiencing, every single one of us. Then presently, we're experiencing the effects of that. We're experiencing a consciousness, a physical body. We have the 6 sense bases. We're experiencing contact through those 6 sense bases. And now the mind is experiencing feelings, the pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. And now in the present moment, there are certain causes, which are craving, clinging, and existence. That's what we're experiencing presently. And these causes are now going to lead to future effects of birth, aging, and death. So what you're looking to do is dismantle all of this through the elimination of ignorance. I've got some more to share, but I think I'm going to pause here and see what questions you guys might have.
Yeah, I think I'm understanding it up until the birth. I feel as though these are like, up until that point, they're sort of like problems that I'm trying to eliminate, and then there's existence, and then there's birth. What's the difference between the two? And is it just at that point you're moving into your future gamma?
Existence is where now there's a being that exists inside the womb, but it hasn't been born yet. It hasn't been brought out into the world. The birth is actually coming out into the world. So a being could die inside the womb where it never has been born.
Yeah. Okay. I think up until this point, it feels as though maybe I'm just not understanding the whole concept, but it feels as though it's how like a craving, desire, and attachment that leads to a problem comes into existence. Are you not talking about that? Or human form?
I'm talking about a being. This is how a being actually comes into existence. And also, by the way, this isn't typically a teaching that someone understands right away. So like when I taught you guys the universal truth of impermanence, 3 minutes of teaching, a couple of minutes of reflection, you got it, right? Universal truth of discontentedness, same kind of way, right? Four Noble Truths, you pretty much get that. This is a teaching that people usually need to learn and revisit multiple times. Some students take upwards of a year to really reflect on this and understand it 100%. So if there's anybody here, imagine there's several that aren't understanding this 100%, that's normal, very normal. But here what I'm doing is I'm just looking to introduce it to you multiple times, kind of teach it to you multiple times, give you enough that you can start reflecting on it and you can start working with it to try to understand it. In this book that I recommended at the beginning of the retreat, volume 5, this is in chapter 14. So you can read it here, you can read it online because I give these books away for free by downloading them or taking and go print it, or you can get printed versions by reimbursing us, or you can get it on Amazon. If you look in volume 5, chapter 14, not only is this there, but it's my words walking you through like how a being is actually born and brought into the world. So this can really help you.
Thank you. I guess for me, it was just it felt like a jump from talking about eliminations of craving, desires, and attachment to all of this earth, and I didn't see the connection.
Okay. So the craving is the fuel that's leading to the rebirth, because we describe those as fires in the mind, right? The 3 unwholesome roots or the 3 poisons or the 3 fires. This craving, if you ever think about like when you've gotten angry, you probably felt this heat coming up in the face and in the body. You probably might have felt this heat when the anger was arising. So when the craving is arising, when the anger is arising, when the ignorance is there, it's like a fire. And as long as that fire is burning at the end of this life, it's going to lead to a next life. Because of that craving, that's the fuel, that's what creates the spark that leads to the next life. Just like that fire sends off a spark, it's a completely new fire, but it's coming from the fuel of this one over here. So as long as there's craving in the mind, it's going to continue to exist over and over and over again. So let me take it this way. Let me describe it this way. Our mother and father had sex potentially, or we were brought together in a petri dish. Nowadays that's possible, right? You can put an egg and sperm together, we were inserted into our mother, but nonetheless there was an egg and a sperm that came together. This is the beginning of the forming of the physical body, of the egg and the sperm coming together. But now somewhere in the world there's a consciousness. That consciousness existence came about because of its ignorance in its previous life and its decisions in that previous life. That's what led to the forming of that consciousness. And now that consciousness is going to come and find that name and form. It's going to come and find that egg and sperm that have been put together. And now we've got a physical body and a consciousness that has come together. Now, when that comes together inside the womb, now there's going to be the 6 sense bases starting to develop. So scientists say that somewhere between 2 to 6 weeks, this is when the 6 sense bases are starting to form inside the womb. From 2 to 6 weeks, the 6 sense bases are starting to form. So now when we're inside the womb and those 6 sense bases have formed, we're experiencing contact inside the womb. We're experiencing certain things. We're having certain feelings inside the womb with those 6 sense bases. Maybe it feels comfortable. Maybe it feels warm. We hear sounds because even though there's skin there, we still hear sounds. When my son was inside the womb, I used to play mandolin and he could hear it and he would kind of move around as I was playing the mandolin. And when he came out, he recognized the sound too. So you can hear things even when you're inside the womb. That skin, you can still hear sounds through the skin. So we're experiencing contact through the 6 sense bases. And as we're inside the womb, we're having feelings inside there. There's feelings when you're inside the womb. Pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. Those can occur. And now we start craving. We start longing, yearning inside the womb. And we start clinging too. We start holding on and wanting this to be permanent. And we have this existence inside the womb. But eventually we're born into the world. And as soon as we're born into the world, we start crying right away. were discontent right away because we were clinging to that experience that we had inside the womb. We wanted that to be permanent. And now, because we were born into the world, we are going to experience aging and death. And we experience that sorrow right away. We experience the pain and the displeasure right away as soon as we come into the world, because we had craving inside the womb, and now we experience this impermanence that we were brought outside the womb, either through the natural birthing canal, or we had a C-section and we came out through a C-section or what have you, and right away we're discontent. And it's all because of this whole sequence of events that has led to that initial discontentedness when we come out of the womb. But we were experiencing discontentedness inside the womb. It's just that the people on the outside may or may not have understood what was going on inside. We were still experiencing this discontentedness. We just weren't born yet, right? So this whole sequence of events comes about because of the ignorance. And this is where, when you learn in this retreat about wrong behavior and observances, and I share with you that the Buddha never taught any rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, you understand why through dependent origination. Because he's teaching you how to dismantle this and get to the point where you don't have any discontentedness. And in order to do that, you have to get rid of ignorance. You have to eliminate this unknowing of true reality. And the only thing that's going to do that is wisdom. You need to cultivate wisdom. And there's no rite, ritual, ceremony, or worship that's going to produce wisdom. So when you go into a Buddhist environment and you see things where ordained practitioners or other people are doing rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship, you know right away that they're not in the first stage of enlightenment, because they would have needed to know dependent origination, and they're not understanding the underlying problem that the Buddha taught to eliminate. He taught to eliminate ignorance, and you can't do that through rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship. So that's why you're encouraged to cultivate wisdom all through the teachings of the Buddha, all through the classes and courses and retreats that I share. I teach you to cultivate wisdom, and it's because of this. I'm guiding you to eliminate dependent origination. So from the very beginning, if somebody starts with me, and they might not get to this for a year or two after they start with me learning. Some of you guys just started learning with me 5 days ago, and now here you are learning this. That's why I shared with you guys yesterday that some of you might just decide to stay with the Eightfold Path and the 5 precepts and meditation training and generosity and the 5 precepts and all that stuff. You might just decide to stay with that and really get that around your arms around that. There's no harm in you getting exposed to this, because you can see what the future holds. But the idea of going from having started to learn with me 5 days ago to now understanding this, that's very challenging for an individual to be able to accomplish. So, but you can see that the whole path to enlightenment is all about cultivation of wisdom. That's what you're being guided to do from the very beginning of your journey. If you're learning with me, I'm teaching you to cultivate wisdom. And this is why, because you need to be able to get to wisdom to be able to eliminate your discontentedness. You would never be able to eliminate your discontentedness if you continue to have this ignorance or unknowing of true reality. So you need to learn, examine, investigate teachings. You need to reflect on them, independently verify them, and you need to practice them. Because this ignorance isn't just eradicated through intellectual learning. The way that you eradicate ignorance is through your practice. Right? So someone could intellectually know something is unwise, but they still choose to do it because of ignorance. So we could understand intellectually it's unwise to use drugs and alcohol, for example, but we all, or not all of us, but we chose to do it, right? Because of our ignorance. We intellectually understood drugs and alcohol were unwise, but we still chose to do it because we had ignorance, and we had craving too. Right? That we were craving those pleasant feelings, right? And that's what led to our discontentedness when we were doing that. So the ignorance gets eradicated first, starting with intellectual learning, and that's what you guys are doing here. But then you move it into reflection, where you're reflecting on things and trying to determine what's true or false, but then you practice it. And now when you're making decisions through your wisdom, that's when the ignorance is actually eradicated, through making decisions. Your volitional formations need to be informed by your wisdom. As long as you're making unwise decisions, you still have ignorance in the mind. So these 10 fetters, there's 10 of them. The 10th one is called ignorance. And for every single person, the ignorance is the last thing to get eliminated from the mind. If you have sensual desire, you still have ignorance. If you have conceit, you still have ignorance. If you have wrong behavior and observances, you still have ignorance. So it's getting rid of the ignorance that's going to completely purify the mind. And that's why you're learning, reflecting, and practicing. Question?
So it looks to me almost like this could be the first slide. Like, this is what Buddhism is about. We're trying to avoid rebirth in order to avoid discontentedness. And this is how you do it.
The answer is yes, but I would reorder that you're looking to eliminate discontentedness. And by having eliminated discontentedness, you will eliminate rebirth. It's like a 2-for-1 special.
So like, this is all about, and then all the other stuff, it is kind of after.
Yeah, anything that you learn, like the Eightfold Path, the 5 precepts, the meditation training, the generosity, everything is coming back to this. That's why it's the highest, most ultimate truth. Once you understand this, you'll understand why you're being taught to not lie and to not steal and to do that. And the reason why is because to steal, you have a certain craving in your mind. You're longing, yearning for something. You're trying to get those pleasant feelings from acquiring this thing, and you don't have the resources yourself, so you steal it. And now you realize, man, I'm stuck in this cycle. I just keep doing this stuff over and over and over again. And now when you cultivate the wisdom to realize those things are unwise, you can completely dismantle this whole thing. So yeah, everything comes back to this. Yep. Yes, sir.
I was just thinking back to the aversion part. So let's say the Buddha's walking down like a street, and on one side is, I don't know, a field of flowers, and on the other side is, a sewer or something. Now, is he indifferent to which side of the street he walks on, or like, would he cross the road to be on the flower side because it smells nicer? I mean, or would he just, I don't know, not care? Or like, I don't understand what he would do in this situation.
An enlightened being would be completely content and peaceful on either side of the street, but you might prefer to walk on the side of the street where the flowers are, but you would be completely content on either side. Your mind wouldn't be upset or frustrated or annoyed or anything like that.
But he has a preference.
Yeah, there can be a preference, but the mind can remain completely content and joyful no matter what.
I don't know, I'm stuck in a thought loop about this. I can't imagine having a preference but not acting on it if I have that freedom.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, an enlightened being might prefer to walk on the flower side and choose to walk on that side, but let's just say they happen to be on the other side, and there's a concrete barrier between the two, and they just can't get over to the other side. They would be completely content to walk on that side too, because they understand that this experience is impermanent.
Okay.
Right? There's no reason to form inner feelings based on this odor of the sewer. There's no need to form frustration or agitation. You can calmly walk down this side too. But if you had the choice, maybe you would prefer to walk on the other side, but you would be completely content on this side too. Steve.
Thank you, David. So if I find myself in a human form, which I am, and it probably means that I've existed in a human form before, albeit not as Steve, but as some totally different form. I mean, a human being is stuck in this forever, unless and until they get to enlightenment. Is that correct?
Yes. This is the cycle of rebirth.
Right. And the only way to escape it is to get to enlightenment.
Yes.
The final stage of enlightenment. And then in that final stage of enlightenment, that consciousness which is developed in that lifetime, which achieved enlightenment, that will go somewhere else, which the Buddha doesn't talk about, from my understanding, but it won't be reborn.
He doesn't say that it will go somewhere else,
Right.
or that it won't go somewhere else.
He doesn't.
Yeah, it's just undeclared. But each consciousness is impermanent, right? We've talked about that before, how like this consciousness that Steve has, this mind that Steve has, it's not the same mind as before. It's a completely new consciousness. So at the time of death for an enlightened being, whether that consciousness dissolves, and we know it's impermanent, but we don't know what happens next. The Buddha leaves it wisely, in my opinion, as an undeclared teaching. But by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind's so peaceful and joyful, it doesn't matter, right? Like if there is something next, it's either as good as what you're experiencing or better. And if there isn't something next, so be it. But if the Buddha taught, let's just say there was something wonderful next after enlightenment, if he taught that, that's just one more craving for the mind to have to let go of. And so this path isn't about this wonderful afterlife. This path is about getting to a wonderful life now, in this life, so you can enjoy it.
Yeah, thank you. That's important clarification, because what is the motivation to pursue this? Because I could think, well, this consciousness is going, when I die, the consciousness is going to go somewhere else, and it's someone else's problem to work that out.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, I'm experiencing suffering. So it comes back to saying, why do this is to eliminate suffering and discontentedness.
Yeah,
now.
Exactly.
Right.
It's not enjoyable to sit around and feel guilty and shameful and fearful or stress or anxiety. So that is oftentimes the motivator that motivates someone to go on this path, to get out of that.
Thank you.
That's where you can be appreciative of all those painful feelings. Maybe when we were a child and we experienced the things that we experienced, that can be the motivators to have us go down this path. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
So I have a question about, so an enlightened being is able to have his ego fully eradicated, right?
They would have eradicated their ego, yep.
Okay. Would that, so if the ego is eradicated, then this enlightened being cannot boast about any of the things that he done or did, right?
He wouldn't be interested in, or she wouldn't be interested in boasting about. The mind just isn't interested in that.
Okay, then
because the mind will know that it leads to unwholesome results.
But if that's then the case, why can an enlightened being not tell you, tell anybody that this person is enlightened? Because there's nothing to boast about it.
Speaking about themselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this situation, if somebody told you that they were enlightened, you would know that they're not. That's one of the best indications to know someone's not enlightened, is that they will tell you that they are enlightened. So an enlightened being wouldn't go around boasting that they're enlightened or putting it on their Facebook profile or anything like that.
Yeah, but again, there's nothing to boast about because they cannot boast about it. So they can tell it that they are enlightened without boasting about it.
So an enlightened being would be able to, so if somebody said that they are enlightened, that is the boasting. They are then boasting about their condition of their mind. So an enlightened being would choose not to do that.
Yes, but this enlightened being has nothing to boast about.
What do you mean they have nothing to boast about?
So because it doesn't have an ego, right?
They don't have an ego,
yeah.
So they're going to choose not to boast.
Exactly, but enlightenment isn't something to boast about, right?
I'm sorry, say again?
So enlightenment isn't something to boast about.
It is not something to boast about, correct?
Exactly, but that does mean that he can say that he is enlightened.
I'm not following what you're saying.
As in, if this being that is enlightened says it is enlightened for himself, but this person, he says he is enlightened, but he does not, because he doesn't have an ego, he can say the things that he experiences and sees. But the simple act of talking about it, because he doesn't have an ego, he can talk about it because he doesn't have an ego.
No, just the choice to talk about it shows that there is an ego.
Yeah, why is that?
Because this individual is now boasting about the condition of their mind, saying right away, if somebody says, I am enlightened, I would say, who's the I that is enlightened? There is no I. Someone who says, I am enlightened, isn't even in the first stage of enlightenment because they haven't realized non-self to realize that there is no I here.
And if someone refers to this person and he gets asked and he wants to answer truthfully?
An individual who's enlightened would be speaking beneficially. And to speak beneficially, if somebody says, I am enlightened, right away, that's not true because there's no I. And if somebody said to you that I am enlightened, now you don't have any way of determining whether that's true or false because you don't have the wisdom to know whether this person is enlightened or not. So it's unbeneficial for that person to say that they're enlightened. So instead, what an enlightened being would be more interested in doing is helping you to understand what enlightenment is, because then you could decide for yourself whether that person is enlightened or not. An enlightened being doesn't need to go around and tell everybody that they're enlightened, because what is that doing other than looking for gratification? Now they're looking for gratification. Oh, should we admire you because you're enlightened? Like, what do you want from us? If this person is boasting about their mental state, they're wanting something from the people around them. Whereas if someone is truly enlightened, other enlightened beings will be able to determine that for themselves. Unenlightened beings wouldn't be able to determine whether someone is enlightened or isn't. If they're further along on their path, they can know whether someone's enlightened or not, even though they are unenlightened. But there's just no benefit in sharing with someone that I am enlightened, because it doesn't lead to any wisdom for you to be able to determine that for yourself. So an enlightened being would be interested in you getting the wisdom, because they know that that's what's going to help you, is you getting the wisdom. And just saying I am enlightened doesn't give you any wisdom.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep. If we could get onto this topic, even though the ego is part of the path to enlightenment, but if you guys could ask questions about this stuff.
Yeah. So first question is that this accounts for beings which have form, I guess, because we have their name and form. I would assume that there are other beings which are not animals and humans have different part of origination, or
this is describing living beings, and particularly human beings.
Okay.
So hell beings, afflicted spirits, and heavenly beings that are formless beings, they're not considered living beings. They're in existence, but they're not considered to be living beings, because you can't kill a hell being, an afflicted spirit, or a heavenly being. So understanding the 5 aggregates in form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, and consciousness, that's to help you practice that first precept of living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So you're not causing harm to a living being, because now this harm will come back to you. But you can't kill a hell being, an afflicted spirit, or a heavenly being. So that's why this is describing living beings versus just all beings that are in existence, because a formless being isn't going to have name and form.
Okay, so formless beings become clear later on in the path, I guess.
It's not something that you need to know about, because you're not a formless being. You're a human being, so you need to understand this in relationship to you, because you're now trying to dismantle this as being part of the path to enlightenment.
Second question. So if then the having sex and having children is basically this knowing of true reality that kind of brings new cycles of rebirth, new humans, then it makes sense that monks who decided not to have sex, not to have children, are kind of going the same direction toward enlightenment. And I'm just thinking that then having sex and children and then deciding to go to enlightenment is the best of both worlds then?
I wouldn't describe it that way.
Okay.
The choosing not to have sex is not because of not being interested to bring beings into the world. That's to help you eliminate your sensual desire. Because as long as you're having sex, the mind is longing, yearning through the body for pleasure. Also through the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, the mind. All 6 sense bases are involved when you're having intimate contact. That's why there's so much pleasure involved with it. But that's still conditional experience. And now the mind's going to get excited, but then you're going to experience the painful feelings later when the mind's agitated and frustrated that you can't have sex. So that's one of the strongest central desires that the mind has, is the desire for sexual contact. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people.
Yeah, it makes sense. I was more referring to experience in life having children, right? Let's say that maybe even without sex, with today's technology, right? So to have this experience in this life, plus having the whole path and go to enlightenment, is then in one lifetime that is available to us here right now, that this body that we are operating with our own mind, kind of.
I'm not understanding. I'm sorry, guys. The questions that you guys are getting to, I'm not understanding these. If someone else is understanding it, let me know.
Okay, doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay.
It's okay. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So, in this particular talk, I have a couple of things here, but just to finish this up, one of the reasons why it's important to understand dependent origination is that you're looking to cultivate wisdom. One of the things to gain from dependent origination is that your goal in the path is to cultivate wisdom. That's what's going to dismantle dependent origination. Never believing anything. So staying dedicated to developing your life practice to constantly cultivate wisdom. Okay, so that's the ultimate goal. So there's this other talk about developing accomplishment in view. I'm just going to go through this real briefly because we have an excursion coming up, and what we're going to do is get in the vans and just go right away rather than go have lunch somewhere else. We're going to leave and go to the excursion right away. So what developing accomplishment in view is it's developing an understanding of the 4 noble truths. This is helping you to establish right view, which we talked about earlier in the retreat. And this is helping you to understand what is discontentedness, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward. So you're going to need to understand that. And in order to understand the 4 noble truths, you need to understand the 3 universal truths. This is going to help you to, by developing accomplishment in view, it's going to help you to eliminate the first 3 fetters. So that's why it's important to develop accomplishment in view. So the Buddha teaches something called the wisdom of principle and the wisdom of entailment. This is related to dependent origination. This is part of having accomplishment in view. That when you develop wisdom of principle, this is understanding each individual aspect of dependent origination. So like, what is ignorance? What is volitional formations? What is a consciousness? What is craving? What is clinging? That's wisdom of principle, understanding each one of those 12 things. Wisdom of entailment is understanding how one thing connects to the other. So ultimately, to be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment, you're going to need to memorize that ignorance leads to volitional formations. Volitional formations leads to a consciousness. Consciousness leads to name and form. Name and form leads to the 6 sense bases. The 6 sense bases leads to contact. Contact leads to feelings. Feelings leads to craving. Craving leads to clinging. Clinging leads to existence. Existence leads to birth. Birth leads to aging, death, sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. You're going to need to memorize that in order to have this wisdom of principle and wisdom of entailment, because that'll help you to be able to dismantle dependent origination. So that's part of accomplishment in view. So there's establishing right view, which is the 4 noble truths, but now you're moving beyond that and getting to the point where you have a deeper view of what the real problem is in the world and what it is that you're really experiencing. You're getting accomplishment in this view of the problem. Establishing right view is to see a certain portion of the problem in the solution, but now you're getting to be accomplished in view, where you can fully see the entire problem. Okay. And then for someone who has established accomplishment in view, the Buddha talks about these 6 cases of incapability. And he has multiple discourses of these 6 cases of incapability. So for someone who's established accomplishment in view, they would be incapable of considering any conditioned object as impermanent, pleasurable, or a self, meaning conditional pleasure. So you would understand the universal truth of impermanence to be able to have accomplishment in view. You'd be incapable of doing a grave act that brings immediate results. I'll explain to you what that is. Sometimes people refer to that as the 5 heinous crimes, but I'll explain to you guys that in a moment. Incapable of resorting to the belief that purity or enlightenment comes about through superstitious or auspicious acts. If you're accomplished in view, meaning you understand dependent origination, you would understand the problem is ignorance, so therefore superstitious and auspicious acts isn't going to lead to enlightenment. You would understand that as accomplishment in view, that it's not rites, rituals, ceremonies, and worship that leads to the elimination of discontentedness. It's the elimination of ignorance that leads to the elimination of discontentedness. So you'd be incapable of resorting to the belief that enlightenment comes about through superstitious or auspicious acts. You'd be incapable of seeking a person worthy of offerings outside of the community. What he means by this is during his lifetime, there were multiple teachers who were teaching. There was him, and then there was multiple other teachers. And all the household practitioners were supporting these different students to be able to help them to get to enlightenment or what they thought was enlightenment. But by the time you get to accomplishment in view, you've learned deeply the teachings of the Buddha and you see how true they are. And what he's saying is you'd be incapable of supporting these other people who aren't actually leading to enlightenment, because these were people hanging themselves upside down from trees, piercing their body with metal implements, laying on beds of nails, starving themselves. And the Buddha said you'd be incapable of supporting those people with offerings because you know what they're doing isn't actually leading to enlightenment, that it's his students that are leading, that are practicing the way that leads to enlightenment. So that's one of the incapabilities. You'd be incapable of residing without deep respect and politeness towards the teacher, the teachings, the community, and the training. Because by the time you get to accomplishment in view, you would have deeply penetrated the teachings and you would see how true they are. You would have seen a significant amount of progress to the condition of your mind in your life. And the Buddha is saying you'd be incapable of having respect towards the teacher, the teachings, the community that you're part of, the training itself, because you'll know that these are the people that are helping you to be able to get to this improved state of mind and life, and you would have seen a certain amount of that progress, so you'd have nothing but deep respect and politeness towards them. You'd be incapable of resorting to anything that should not be relied upon. What that is that you would be able to deeply penetrate into the truth and figure out what is true and false. In other words, you wouldn't be clinging to your perceptions. That if you cling to a perception, you're relying on this assumption and making decisions based on this assumption. But by the time you get to accomplishment in view, you understand the 5 aggregates in these other teachings, so you wouldn't be able to rely upon something that isn't necessarily the truth, that you would be making decisions based on individual truth that you would have investigated and made sure you're not clinging to your perceptions. Then you'd be incapable of undergoing an 8th existence. By the time you get to accomplishment in view, you have made your way to the first stage of enlightenment. And if you die in that stage of enlightenment, you're only going to experience a maximum of 7 rebirths. Some more on this. This is the one over here where he says you'd be incapable of doing a grave act that brings immediate results. That's this right here, that you'd be incapable of depriving your mother, your father, or an arahant of life, that you wouldn't be able to kill your mother, your father, or an enlightened being. And those would bring immediate results. And the reason why an individual wouldn't be able to do this is because they would understand through the teachings of the Buddha that getting into this human life is the very best thing that could ever happen to you to be able to get to enlightenment. And it's your mother and your father that brought you into this world. You might disagree with the things that they've done and certain decisions that they've made, but you'd be incapable of killing them and depriving them of life, because you'd have appreciation and gratitude for the fact that you were able to come into this life and be able to experience the improved mental state that you'd be experiencing by the time you get to this point. So you'd be incapable of killing your mother or father or an enlightened being, because you would understand how important enlightened beings are to the world, that they have a certain amount of wisdom to help other people get to enlightenment. And you would have been in contact with enlightened beings to be able to get to this point where you have accomplishment in view, and you'd be incapable of killing an enlightened being because you understand how important they are to a community to help others to get to enlightenment. Also part of this, incapable of committing a grave act that brings immediate results, is part of this. Incapable of shedding the blood of a Tathagata. A Tathagata is a Buddha. The word Tathagata means the one who's discovered the truth, or one who shares the truth. This is the way the Buddha would refer to himself. He would refer to himself most often as the Tathagata. This is a way of referring to himself in the third person and not necessarily using the word Buddha. He would refer to himself as the Tathagata. And then you would also be incapable of creating division in the community. That's the fifth thing that brings immediate results. Because if you've been in part of a community and you've been improving the condition of your mind through all these teachings, and you would have seen this significant improvement to the condition of your mind, you wouldn't be interested in breaking up a community and creating division within a community. So these are the 5 things that are grave acts that bring immediate results: killing your mother, your father, an enlightened being, a Buddha, or creating division in the community. And you would be incapable of doing that if you had accomplishment in view. And then this 6th one here, which is just part of this discourse, is you'd be incapable of acknowledging another teacher, because again, you've experienced a certain amount of significant progress to the condition of your mind in your life, and you would know that it's this collection of teachings that is leading to the improved condition of your mind in life, and you'd be incapable of acknowledging another teacher. Then incapable of resorting to the view that pleasure and pain are made by oneself, by another, or both oneself and made by another, not by oneself, but have arisen by accident or chance, or not made by another, but have arisen by accident or chance. Are made neither by oneself nor by another, but have arisen by accident or chance. You'd be incapable of resorting to these views because you would understand what is causing the discontentedness, and it's craving, desire, attachment. It's none of these things. So it's not made by oneself because there's no self here. It's not made by another person. That's not who's causing your discontentedness. It's being caused by your own mind, by the craving, desire, attachment. It's not being caused by both oneself and another and all these other different things. It's not being caused by accident or chance. There's a real cause and condition behind it. And if you understand dependent origination, having accomplishment in view, you would understand all those 12 interlinking steps that's leading to discontentedness. So this is called accomplishment in view, that you would have that. Other parts of accomplishment in view is that you would understand the unwholesome in the root of the unwholesome. So the Buddha describes the unwholesome as killing living beings, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, and then false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, gossip, craving, ill will, and wrong views. These are all based in craving, anger, and ignorance. So you would understand that these lead to unwholesome results in your life. And the root of that is craving, anger, and ignorance, or the unknowing of true reality. And then you would understand the wholesome in the root of the wholesome, which is abstaining from all of these things. And the root of the wholesome is practicing generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. Okay, so I know I went through that fairly quick, but it's all right here in volume 5. This is something I mentioned to you guys. I'm letting you guys ask questions because I know dependent origination was a very big topic, and I just decided that would be a better use of our time. This is something that you can peer into the book. It's not something that you necessarily need me to teach because it's right there. And if you have questions about it, you can always ask me as you read the book. Okay, so right now it's basically 12:35. What we're going to do for those of you guys that are going on the excursion, the van should be out here waiting for us. We're just going to jump into the van, maybe use the bathroom first. Just jump into the van and go to Hua Tung Tao, the resort or the reservoir. and enjoy some lunch, so we can all eat lunch over there. So thank you guys for your questions. Thank you for your interest to learn. I'm going to pick things up this afternoon or this evening at 6:30, where we're going to do loving kindness meditation together. And then I'm going to teach you this first fetter, what it is, the symptoms, how to eliminate it, and how to know that you've actually eliminated it. So if you'd like to go on the excursion, let's go have fun. Mm-hmm.